Welcome to Just a Minute. Hello, my name is Nicholas Parsons, and as the Minute Waltz fades away, once more it is my pleasure to welcome the four exciting and diverse personalities who this week are going to play Just a Minute. Well, we welcome back Clement Freud, Wendy Richard and Paul Merton, who played the game a number of times, and someone who's never played the game before, we welcome Tony Slattery. But would you please welcome all four of them? This particular edition of Just a Minute comes from the beautiful and ancient Theatre Royal in the delightful and old city of Bury St Edmunds, and we have a wonderful Suffolk audience ready to enjoy it. And sitting beside me sits Andy, who keeps the score and also blows her whistle when the 60 seconds are up. And I'm going to ask our four players of the game to speak, if they can, on the subject that I give them, and they will try and do that without hesitation, repetition, or deviating from the subject. And we're going to begin the show with Clement Freud. Clement, would you talk on the subject of briefs starting now?
My favourite poster came from the Southwell Theatre, which was then a cinema, and it said, forthcoming attractions, the Seventh Veil with briefs. In those days, briefs were short films, and there was really no performance in any cinematographical...
And Wendy Richard challenge. Wendy, what is your challenge?
Just a slight hesitation,
Yes, a stumble, which is a hesitation.
I don't really want to talk about briefs, though.
I'm sure you've got some good things to say about them, Wendy. And you have a point, of course. And you have 39 seconds left to tell us something about briefs starting now.
Years ago, when we were doing Are You Being Served, this is long before I had my pet cockatiel, little Henry, whom you've heard many times mentioned on this programme before.
Paul Merton has challenged.
Deviation from the subject of briefs.
I was getting back round. I was just flicking them in on the local colour, that's all.
Well, we were talking about this cockatoo called Henry, who I'd...
It's a cockatiel.
Cockatiel. It'd be a cockatoo if I got my hands on it.
I think, Wendy, you hadn't really got onto the subject of briefs very quick enough, and I have to be fair within the rules of the game. So, Paul, you have a correct challenge, you have the subject, you have 29 seconds, briefs starting now.
My hobby is knitting briefs for cockatiels, because these birds need to be protected from our cold winter climate. They sometimes feel a draft around certain parts of their anatomy, which could be well protected by a good, solid pair of British briefs. The kind of briefs that helped us win the Second World War. When Hitler looked... Did somebody buzz?
Yes, Clement Freud's challenge.
Hesitation.
Oh, no.
Please stop.
I'm riding the laughter, surely. That's echoing around the building.
I mean, the people in Bury St Edmunds obviously do laugh far more vociferously than elsewhere, and I do think, it would be fair to him, he was riding the laugh, so...
I'm sorry, Nicholas, riding the laugh?
Yes. Have you never ridden a laugh, show. Tony?
No.
You just ignore them, do you?
Well,
or don't you get any?
No, that's right. I modelled myself on Sale of the Century, so...
You don't look old enough.
You look old enough, don't you?
I think we should go back to playing Just a Minute. And you have 5 seconds to tell us more about briefs, starting now.
Briefs can come in many different sizes. There is large...
Whoever is speaking when the whistle goes gains an extra point, and on this occasion it was, of course, Paul Merton, who naturally has a strong lead. Paul, would you take the next round? It's Codswallop. Will you talk on the subject of Codswallop, starting now?
A codswallop is an expression meaning rubbish, I suppose. If I was to say I walked all the way from London today and I left at midday and I got here at 4, that would be regarded as codswallop. Baron Munchausen was known for his tall tales. These, again, could be referred to as codswallop. People would say to him, Baron, you talk a load of...
And... Clement has challenged.
2 barons.
2 barons,
Yes.
yes.
Two barons.
So repetition, a point to you, Clement. You take the subject. 40 seconds left. Codswallop, starting now.
Very few people realise.
Paul Merton, challenge.
I was riding a laugh.
No.
Clement, I think you were actually riding a silence. Paul, you have the subject back, and you have 38 seconds. Another point, of course, Codswallop starting now.
In my old school, we used to play this game that consisted of hitting each other across the face with dead fish. It was called Codswallop. And what fun we had in that junior school as we would queue up to go into our geography lessons. Somebody would suddenly produce a haddock.
Oh, Clement Freud, you challenged. I didn't hear the buzzer go. But your light came on,
It
yes.
was repetition of school.
Yes, there was too much repetition. I was enjoying it so much I wasn't even looking. But Clement, yes, 26 seconds starting now.
It is a little-known fact that Codswallop is actually a single word. It is not hyphenated, there's no apostrophe. It's simply Codswallop, and in Scrabble it counts about 48 if you get a double and a treble under the right letters. The meaning of the word is nonsense, rubbish.
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of word.
Yes, repetition, and you have 7 seconds to talk on Codswallop starting now.
It's an old English word that is used by old English...
Tony Slattery has got in with his first challenge, and he's never played the game before, and he's got in with 3 seconds to go, so he's learning very fast. So, Tony, the subject is Codswallop. You have only 3 seconds, starting now.
Down the front of the Chippendales pouches, they put a...
So Paul Merton with his Codswallop got quite a few points in that round. Tony was speaking as the whistle went, got the extra point. He's equal with Clement Freud in second place. And Wendy, it's your turn to begin. Wendy Richard, will you tell us something about freeloaders? You have 60 seconds as usual, starting now.
There is nothing worse than a freeloader. There used to be one such person, sometimes joined our company in our local, and one night, much to the amusement of everyone else in that establishment, 2 of the chaps picked this person up and turned him upside down to shake the money out of his pockets to get him to buy a drink. Freeloaders have a habit of nipping off to the gents or the ladies, because they come in either sex, when it is their turn.
Paul Merton challenged.
Hesitation.
Yes, it's when she said they come in either sex. I mean, she didn't know how to follow that.
I thought I might have got a laugh there, so I was getting ready to ride.
Wendy, what...
Paul, you challenged, and you have 30 seconds to tell us something about freeloaders starting now.
I've spent my life as a freeloader, and I'm proud of it. I haven't bought a drink since 1968. I was riding a laugh.
Wendy, you challenged.
Well, I thought it was a hesitation.
Yeah. Wendy. It's all right, you don't need to do my job for me, audience. It was hesitation. So 21 seconds for you to tell us more about freeloaders starting now.
Every licensed establishment has their freeloader. You see them standing back with their hands...
Tony Slattery challenge.
yes, there was a slight hesitation.
There was a
Loath as I
definite
am as the new boy, but I think it was. Well, I want to jump in now and again.
I'll
That's
see
all right.
you in the car park.
As you wish.
That's very
need to,
decent.
You don't need to justify. I think you
Should
made
we
an
form an orderly queue?
You see what happens to the new boys, don't you, Tony?
Yes.
14 seconds for you to tell us something about freeloaders. Tony Slattery, starting now.
Interestingly enough, the word freeloaders also refers to a type of light industrial farm machinery, which is used to levitate a bull on top of a cow just prior to mating.
Paul Merton challenged.
Deviation. How can you levitate a bull? you could lift it up. You could levitate it.
If I may spring to my own defence, that's a perfectly allowable synonym for lift, levitate. I don't think the challenge is valid, I have to say.
I don't know.
I think you should just have buzzed in for leviation.
No. And you've got another point, and you have 1 second, remarkably, to talk on the subject starting now. And someone's challenging.
Hesitation.
Yeah.
No, that's not allowable.
So Tony's got another point. I wouldn't worry, Tony's another point to you, and you have half a second on Freeloader starting now.
Bulls.
Well, it's the first time Tony Slattery has played the game, and already the level of the standard of entertainment has already ascended. Tony got a lot of points in that round, including one for speaking as a whistle went. He's now in second place, only 1 point behind our leader, Paul Merton. And Clement, it's your turn to begin. Charley's Aunt. How apt. Because I'm sure everybody in Bury St Edmunds knows that Charley's Aunt, that classic farce by Brandon Thomas, first started at this very Theatre Royal in Bury St Edmunds.
You were in it, weren't you?
Some people say it's the only reason I got the job, so they get a few laughs. Clement, the subject's Charley's Aunt, 60 seconds, starting now.
It is an extraordinary coincidence that I should be asked to speak on the subject of Charley's Aunt here at the Theatre Royal in Bury St Edmunds, where Charley's Aunt was first produced.
Wendy Richard, challenge.
No, I'm sorry, you're going to start listing again, aren't you?
I
can see it coming over you, Clement.
Wendy, there's no list involved.
You aren't? No, he is. He's
Which
going
side
to
does
start
Clement
making
list
lists.
to?
I could see it coming on.
Are we allowed to be psychic in our challenges?
I think Wendy's still phased out by the offer she's made to Tony Slattery, actually. Wendy, we haven't had a list, and I don't know what will happen if we do, but that is not a viable challenge. So Clement gets another point, and he keeps the subject. 49 seconds. Charley's Aunt, starting now.
In 1892, Charley's Aunt was produced in this very theatre. And Nicholas...
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of theatre.
That's right, he did say the Theatre Royal before.
Yes.
That's right, yes. He knew it. He should have gone on, trying to bluff you out as he usually does. 39 seconds are left for you to tell us something about Charley's Aunt, Paul, starting now.
Charley's aunt was a wonderful woman. She could levitate a bull on a cow like nobody's business. You show her a bull and a cow and whoop that...
Clement Freud is challenged.
A repetition.
Yes. You have the subject back of Charley's Aunt, Clement. Another point in 32 seconds, starting now.
I've always been a bit suspicious of playwrights who give characters names like Lord Fancourt of Babberley, because the whole idea is to get a laugh at the ludicrous nature of the nomenclature, when in fact fun ought to be in the script and not in the description of the dramatis persona. Charley's Aunt I have seen in many places throughout the world, and a very good laugh it has been, much funnier than levitating a bull.
Paul, challenge before you got to the levitation.
Repetition of laugh, I'm afraid.
Yes, it was a good laugh, and you've had a good laugh, so 2 laughs, Clement. And Paul's got in with 4 seconds to go on Charley's Aunt, starting now.
Edith was her name. She used to go down to the pub on a Friday night and entertain the...
Tony Slattery, it is your turn to begin. The subject is the crown jewels. Will you tell us something about those gems, starting now?
There was once a film called Lady Godiva in which it was postulated that fake crown jewels were in fact more lustrous, more shiny and more generally wonderful than the crown jewels themselves. A lot of people agree with this. There was an occasion at the Royal... Oh, I'm just talking gibberish! I've challenged myself there. I'm terribly sorry.
Tony, I'm afraid before you challenge yourself, Wendy had already challenged you.
Yes.
And, Wendy, what was your...
Repetition.
Yes, what of?
Just about everything.
More.
You had 3 mores right at the beginning, and they let you go on it just to be kind.
Oh,
and
that's
then
nice of you. Thank you very much.
More this and more that.
That's very sweet of you. It'll be extra fun in the car park, Wendy, later.
That's a very dirty laugh, isn't it? It is.
What I want to know is, are we allowed to come and watch?
We were rather hoping you might make the coffee, Nicholas.
I might tell you, the last time I worked with Tony Slattery, he described me as a sexual hand grenade.
From the First World War?
This programme has really gone down. We never have this trouble with Peter Jones.
No. You haven't made an offer like that to Peter Jones. Wendy, you have a correct challenge, and you have 40
I've
seconds.
forgotten what it is now.
I'm going to tell you. It's the crown jewels, and you start now.
I remember as a child being taken to the Tower of London to see the crown jewels. Oh, I thought they were wonderful. They were so glistening and the gold was gleaming. They look unreal because they are so genuine, if you see what I mean.
Tony Slattery.
So I'm sorry, this is a genuine query. Can one challenge on drivel? I don't know.
Well, we never challenged you when you were dribbling.
Yes, point taken.
I quite agree, Wendy. You made your point, and you keep the subject. Another point to you. 21 seconds. Crown jewels, starting now.
The memory of this marvellous sight of the crown jewels has stayed with me ever since. Even though I have paid visits back to the place where they are kept, the queue of people waiting to see the crown jewels is far too long and would take such an age to get round to see the crown jewels. There was once a film made...
So Wendy Richard was speaking then as the whistle went and got an extra point, but she's still in 4th place. Wendy, it's your turn to begin. The subject is records. Can you tell us something about those in just a minute, starting now?
We have a CD for those sort of records. I tried to put one of these records on the other day and couldn't work out why it wasn't playing. Apparently, I had it on upside down. You see, they're not like ordinary records. They only have the writing on one side of the record. And if you're like me on a Sunday afternoon, it's a very easy mistake to make. Apart from that, the other sort of records are people who do things or collect things and have more of such objects than anybody else. And this lot are going to let me go on for 60 seconds. They've done it to me before.
Paul has challenged you.
Repetition of things.
Don't do that, you nearly woke up Clement.
I think we've lost the first 3 rows out there.
Yes, a repetition of things. Yes, you have a correct challenge, Paul. 19 seconds to tell us something about records starting now.
There are some people who dedicate their lives to getting into the Guinness Book of Records. They will push a pea up a mountain higher than anyone has ever done before, or they will eat a copious amount of baked beans, a far greater lot than anyone has ever previously.
Clement Freud challenge.
Two Evers.
Evers, yes, it was going
It's
ever
true.
so, yes. You've got him with 2 seconds to go on records, Clement, starting now.
The great thing about Virgin records is they have no holes in them.
We're all riding the laugh at the moment. Saved by the bell. I will whistle on this occasion. Clement, you've got an extra point for speaking as it went. And Clement, it's your turn to begin. The subject is garden gnomes. Will you tell us something about them, Clement, in just a minute, starting now?
I've never quite understood why garden gnomes should be such objects of mirth, like mothers-in-law and gorgonzola. But say garden gnomes and people laugh or titter.
Wendy Richard,
Was there
chance.
2 laughs?
No.
No.
I beg your pardon, Clement. I'm suitably humbled.
No, it was
I
a
don't
titter.
think there are any laughs, actually.
He's riding for a fall. Right, 48 seconds for you, Clement, to keep going on garden gnomes, starting now.
It is the great credit of this government that garden centres are allowed to open on a Sunday. So any...
Tony Slattery.
No simple deviation from the truth. The idea of this government having any credit at all is just monstrous.
What a difficult choice. I'm not going to make a political decision.
No, you want your knighthood, didn't you?
Right.
Well, you would say that.
43 seconds for you to continue on garden gnomes, starting now.
garden gnomes...
And Paul Merton challenge.
It's hesitation.
Yes, I think there was a hesitation, yes. There are 41 seconds left for garden gnomes with you, Paul, starting now.
I got
And Freud challenge.
That wasn't very quick either.
No. But it was definitely quicker than you. In fact,
still worth a point.
Let Pauline decide in the car park.
40 seconds for you, Paul. Still with garden gnomes, starting now.
just before.
And Clement Freud challenge.
Deviation.
Why?
He was very quick that time.
Yeah. Give Clement a bonus point because we like the challenge, and a point also to Paul because he was interrupted, and 39 seconds to continue on garden gnomes, Paul, starting now.
I got married at the end of last year, and amongst the wedding presents that I received was 4 garden gnomes.
Clement Freud challenged.
Deviation.
Why?
Grammatical. Amongst the presents I received, were, not was.
I think we've already established that I did metal work.
A very difficult decision to make because we are allowed to be very colloquial when we speak in this show, so I think I give the benefit of the doubt to Paul and tell him to continue with 31 seconds on garden gnomes, starting now.
George, Paul, John and Ringo are the names of these garden gnomes. They sit at the end of the garden looking up at...
Tony Slattery.
Probably incorrect. Garden twice, but that's all right.
If it's a subject on the card, you can repeat again. And the word garden is part of garden gnomes.
You're not wrong there.
No. But I was explaining it very simply to you because I know...
Thank you. Right, it's war.
Yes. Right.
He wasn't like this on Sailor the Century, was he? It was all, I'll have the kettle for £5, a toast for 4.
Yeah.
You must be a lot older than you think, because that's going back to the open sale, which was dropped after 2 or 3 years.
It was, yes. I wonder why.
Thanks for that.
Come on, Nicholas. Leave the action. Get on with the game.
We don't charge any points for that.
Thank you.
Paul Merton has still got the garden gnomes and at the bottom of his garden, apparently, and 21 seconds starting now.
Some people do kidnap garden gnomes, if that is not too ungrammatical for you. They hijack these particular creatures out of people's gardens and...
Clement Freud challenge.
The third people.
No,
Yes,
people's.
People, and peoples.
You...
Third.
Peoples with a possessive apostrophe is different from people, isn't it?
Clement, I agree with your challenge. You have 12
I
seconds.
didn't understand it.
On garden
But then that's
gnomes.
my fault.
Oh, you worked too hard at your metalwork. That was the problem. Garden gnomes with you, Clement, starting now.
Smith, Jones, Robertson, Cartwright and Williams are good names for garden gnomes. I think rather better than the Christian ones described by Paul Merton, who called them Ringo, George, Paul.
So Clement Freud, speaking as a whistle wind, got the extra point. He's still in second place. He's 3 points behind Paul Merton, still in the lead. Then comes Tony Slattery, a few points behind. And then a little behind him is Wendy Richard. And we're moving into the last round. Oh, you might be interested to know, in that last round we had a record number of 10 challenges. It's never happened before, 10 challenges.
Very interesting.
Can I just go and phone my wife about it?
Do you have some hot sweet tea? I feel faint.
No, I do like to throw out these little gems occasionally because I'm confident of the reaction that I will receive. Paul, the subject is matches. Will you tell us something about those in this game starting now?
If you look at the ordinary matchbox, you'll see written on the side something like average contents 54. Sometimes it will...
Tony Slattery got in.
A bit of a hesitation.
Yeah, definite hesitation.
Wandering down a huge area of repetition, I suddenly realised.
Yes. Tony, you have 52 seconds to tell us something about matches starting now.
Sometimes the content can be 32 matches. Sometimes it can be 30...
And
Oh, my God! That's dreadful. I do apologise for being...
don't apologise.
I do apologise for being crap. But I'm getting the hang of it.
It's a bit late in your life to suddenly start apologising. That's right, yes. Good point.
Ladies and gentlemen, Paul has his hair done at B&Q.
Clement, you have a
At
correct...
least I don't buy my shirts at Colourblind Are Us.
This from a man who's wearing one of Wincy Willis's jogging outfits.
I now realise, listeners, why I made that slip of the tongue when I was talking earlier on about William Bligh of the Bounty, because I looked at Tony Slattery and he's wearing a Mounties shirt, and of course that's why I said William Bligh of the Bounty, and I wish I hadn't bothered to mention that fact. I don't think to anybody.
You mean to say there were 10 challenges in the last round? 10?
Absolutely. Clement Freud, we're with you. 48 seconds to tell us something about matches starting now.
There's a dreadful hush in the close tonight, 10 to make and a match to win, a bumping pitch and a blinding night, an hour to play and the last man in. It is not for the sake of a ribboned coat. Now that was all about matches. It's written by Sir Henry Newbolt, a poet who, as far as I know, never came to Bury St Edmunds, but was a pretty good chap and sometimes challenged 8 or 9 times in a round, where perhaps 10 was too often. Matches are games played between 2 teams. Cricket, football, rugby, even badminton, squash and tennis matches have occurred, and Suffolk is a wonderful county for such matches. In Walberswick, Dunwich, Westleton, and there are...
Wendy Richard challenge.
He's listing, I told you. Let him get...
Wendy did challenge for that about 20 minutes ago. She was right.
She was right, yes. You are psychic, Wendy, definitely. But I think what we'll do, there's 2 seconds to go, and I think it would be very nice for you to finish the show. Wendy, so we give you the last 2 seconds on matches starting now.
I don't use matches. I have a cigarette lighter. I think matches can be dangerous.
We have no more time, as I warned you, to play just a minute, so let me give you the final scores. Wendy Richard, who's always a joy to have on the programme, finished in 4th place. He was a little way behind our first-time player of the game, Tony Slattery, who tried to bring the standard of play down and achieved it magnificently. And then came Clement Freud, who hasn't had an offer yet from Wendy Richard, and... she was only 1 point behind the one with the most points we adjudged to be the winner, and it is tonight, Paul Merton. Thank you. We hope the listeners at home have enjoyed listening to this particular edition of Just a Minute. It only means to thank our 4 delightful and talented panellists, and also Anne Ling, who sits beside me to keep the score, and also Ian Messiter, and of course our producer, Sarah Smith, and from me as well, Nicholas Parsons. Thank you for listening.
Radio 4, it's 6:30.
Welcome to Just a Minute. Hello, my name is Nicholas Parsons, and as the minute waltz fades away, once more it is my pleasure to welcome the four exciting personalities who this week are going to play Just a Minute. And we welcome back three of the regular players of the game, Derek Nimmo, Clement, Freud and Wendy Richard, and someone who's played the game only once before, Tony Hawks. Would you please welcome all four of them? And, as usual, I'm going to ask them to speak on the subject that I give them, and they will try and do that without hesitation, repetition, or deviating from the subject on the card. And we're going to begin the show this week with Derek Nimmo. Derek, the subject chosen is Bollards. Can you tell us something about bollards in just a minute, starting now?
Bollards are the sort of little poles that you might find on the quayside at Hull, Liverpool, Southampton, Plymouth, Portsmouth, Falmouth, or other such ports. And as your ship comes into port, you throw a rope over the side, and someone will put a round turn and 2 half hitches or a bowline round the bollard, and then you will be secure. A Bristol ship came down the river. Blow my bollards, boy. Gust is a very good song to sing if you're coming into the great estuary of a river and looking for the occasional bollard. I must say, Quinkereem from Nineveh would be when the sort of thing, the cargo you might be carrying when you actually came into this haven. A dirty British coaster with a salt cake smokestack. I'm looking for a bollard, and you saw it, you say, what ho, there's a bollard over the horizon. Hello, my dear fellow. This is the most beautiful bollard I've seen.
Well, what a way to start the show. Bollards to you, Derek. You took the subject and kept going for full 60 seconds without being interrupted. Mind you, I think they did interrupt you because they didn't understand what you were saying half the time. So let's move on, and we'll ask Wendy Richard to take the next subject. A good date. Will you tell us something about that subject, Wendy, in this game, starting now?
When one is appearing in the theatre, it is most important to have a good date. I have been fortunate enough to do several pantomimes. All of them were good dates.
And Derek Nimmo has challenged.
Hesitation.
Yes, I think there was a hesitation. I'm sorry, Wendy. So, Derek, we're going to hear from you. You get a point for a correct challenge, of course. You take over the subject, a good date, starting now.
I think a particularly good date.
And Tony Hawks a challenge.
Can I buzz Derek for repeating port in the first round?
Tony, you can certainly buzz him for repeating port.
It's just taken me a little bit of time to catch up with the speed.
Yes, I can understand that. Well done, he did repeat port. He also repeated river, but nobody picked him up on that as well.
I was going to do that in the next round.
Oh, I see. But unfortunately, you can't gain points in this round from something which was said in the previous round. But it's very nice to hear from you, Tony.
Thank you,
and
Nicholas.
Welcome back to the show. We enjoyed what you did last time, which last year, wasn't it?
It was, Nicholas.
Yes.
It's not important, frankly, but it's nice you remember that far back.
Yes. Oh, I can sometimes, yes. Derek Nimmo, you have a point for an incorrect challenge, and you take over the subject, and there are 50 seconds left on a good date starting
The
now.
25th of December is a particularly good date, because that's the day when I hang up my stocking and leave a little glass of sherry and a mince pie for Santa Claus.
Wendy Richard.
You're
show.
supposed to hang your stocking up on the 24th because it comes the night of
I always go to the watch night service. I'm rather late going to bed.
And also, when you get to Derek's age, you do forget sometimes. So, Wendy, I agree with your challenge, a very good one. You have a point for that. You have 41 seconds to take over a good date starting now.
A good date for pantomime is bright.
Clement Freud's challenge.
We've had pantomime.
You've had pantomime before. You mentioned it last time you were talking. So, Clement, we're going to hear from you, and you have 39 seconds to tell something about a good date starting now.
I always find that a good date comes in a box with a palm tree on it. And when you open, there are sometimes between 40 and 50 dates of impeccable quality, which ideally you stick in your mouth and spit out the stone. But the 24th of April, which is my birthday, is an equally excellent date. If anybody wants to make a note of it and send me a card, it would be immensely appreciated. Derek Nimmo always sends me some sort of communication on that.
Tony Hawk's challenge.
Was there a repetition of sends in there?
Send and sent.
Yes.
Right.
It was nearly a repetition, though, wasn't it?
It was very close, yes. There was only a D and a
rhymed.
T. But
Can you have
difference,
anything for
yes.
that? Or
At
not?
least you challenged in the same round.
8 seconds are left on a good day, Clement, starting now.
If dates are less than very good, people tend to put marzipan into them, which I don't myself like much. Nevertheless...
So, Clement Freud was then speaking as a whistle went. He gained the extra point for doing so, and at the end of that round, he's catching up on Derek Nimmo, who's still in the lead. And Tony Hawks, we'd like you to take the next round, and the subject we've chosen is Geordies. Will you tell us something about that in this game starting now?
Well, Geordies, of course, is an affectionate name for those lovely people from the northeast of England. And...
Derek Nimmo challenged.
Deviation.
Why?
They're not lovely.
The number of fans you can lose with one remark.
when are you doing your next date in Newcastle?
Only when I've got marzipan.
We'll give him a bonus point. I think we liked it.
That's
It was a bit courageous, too, actually. 53 seconds are still with you, Tony, and you get a point for being interrupted, of course. Geordies starting now.
I have always wanted to be able to perfect the Geordie accent. Why, aye, man, away the lads. That'd be about as much use as carrying coals to Newcastle. As you can see.
Clement Freud challenge.
It's two Newcastles.
No, it was Derek Nimmo who mentioned Newcastle before, outside of the game.
Well, it came from that side.
It came from the outside.
Direction.
He didn't mention Newcastle.
I've not actually spoken in the round. How could I have said Newcastle?
Tony, you have a point for an incorrect challenge. There are 42 seconds left on Geordies starting now.
Paul Gascoigne, or Gaza, of course, is a celebrated.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Repetition of course.
Yes, you did say, of course, right at the beginning. You started off by, but well, of course.
I had such a lovely Gascoigne story as well.
Well, maybe you'll get back. 38 seconds for you, Derek, on Geordies starting now.
When we used to have coal mines, a Geordie was the name of a lamp that they had disported by the miners when they went underground, named after George Stephenson, using a very bright light, and a Geordie was something which was something that you actually...
And
I said
Tony
something,
challenge,
tell
yes.
a story about Paul Gascoigne.
Yes.
Tony Hawks got in first. 24 seconds are left with you, Tony, to tell us something about Geordies starting now.
Well, I would so much like...
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Repetition of well.
You
start
don't want to
off
hear
with
the
well.
story, do you? You were lying.
So he doesn't want to hear the story. He wants to get points. That's what he always comes for, points. 22 seconds with you, Derek, on Geordies starting now.
They used to call a guinea a Geordie because it had...
Tony Hawks challenge.
Repetition of call.
They
Call
called
the
before.
miner's lamp in the
That's
first-
right, they
when
call
he
the
was-
miners things.
Yes.
Derek. Well, listen, Tony. 19 seconds, Geordies starting now.
I'm not going to fall into the trap of telling this story about
Clement Freud challenge.
Repetition of story.
Yes, we went to the word...
No. I mentioned that in between the rounds when I was saying I had such a nice Paul Gascoigne story.
I'm very pleased the audience listened as well. Very good. So you've still got Geordies. You've got 16 seconds. Another point, of course, starting now.
Bollards to this particular tale.
Derek Nimmo challenged.
Heavy hesitation.
Derek, I agree with the challenge. 12 seconds are left on Geordies starting now.
Tyneside probably is my least favourite part of
And Clement Freud challenge. Yes, Clement.
Hesitation.
I agree. 8 seconds for you, Clement, on Geordies starting now.
I'd like to tell a rather nice story about Gascoigne, who is known as Gaza, a footballer, who plays for Lazio and was asked by the coach whether...
And we will never know, was it worth finishing or not,
I think
Clement?
it probably is, yes. When Gaza played his first game for Lazio, the coach said to him, "Do your best and we'll pull you off at half-time." And Gaza said, "Oh, that'll be a change. At Tottenham, they gave us oranges."
Well, that's a Geordie for you, isn't it, man? Derek, you are still in the lead at the end of that round, and Clement is still in second place. Then Tony Hawks, and then Wendy Richard in that order. Derek, your turn to begin. The subject is a filthy night. I don't know why they give you these subjects, really, but anyway, would you tell us something about that subject in this game, starting now?
I suppose a really filthy night will be the 30th of April in Germany in particular, because that is Walpurgis night. She was an English...
Wendy Richard
He's
challenge.
hesitating and he's
I give you a
dragging
sense
it
of
out
mystery,
again.
sense
No,
of
you're
mystery.
not, Derek. You do this. You either place drop or you speak very slowly to use up your seconds.
Yes, but actually, Wendy, he didn't actually pause, which is hesitation. And there are 50 seconds for you, Derek, on a filthy night, starting now.
Another filthy night was the 30th of June, 1938.
Tony Hawk's a challenge.
There's no such word as thirst.
So your challenge is deviation of grammar?
Yes.
Right, well done, Tony. You have 47 seconds to tell us something about a filthy night starting now.
I had a filthy night several weeks ago when I was out on a dinner date and I fell over in a puddle, and it was most distressing to me. I had a beautiful girl on my arm and she came with me. There was mud all over her and I was distraught. I started to cry. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She thought I was such a chivalrous fellow up to then, and I'm going at enormous speed and I'm not going to be able to keep this up for much longer, but I'm still going. And I think the other panellists are going to let me suffer on this one.
Jerry Nimmo's put you out of your misery, but what's your challenge, Jerry?
He sort of started to have personal problems and his inability to keep up with the game. And he's rather left this lady lying in the puddle on top of it. Which
So he was deviating from the subject of a filthy night. I agree, Derek. A point to you. 19 seconds are left. A filthy night starting now.
So Yardley Hastings was a particularly filthy knight who lived in Northamptonshire. And he was known for taking damsels back to his house, which was adjacent to Castle Ashby, where he had his way with them. And a filthy night...
Tony Hawk's the challenge.
Did he repeat castle?
No, he didn't. No, castle.
I was
He
just
said
a question
castle,
I was
actually.
interested
No.
in asking.
You're talking about the house. But you got, Derek, another point and 4 seconds on the subject of a filthy night starting
The
now.
night of the long knives, when Himmler and Hitler ordered all the brown shirts to be massacred. 400 of them.
So Derek Nimmo was then speaking as the whistle went, so he gained another point for doing so. And Tony, your turn to begin. Dives. That is the subject on the card. Can you tell us something about it? No.
Degree of difficulty 5.2, said the commentator, as the swimmer stood erect, ready to dive into the water.
Wendy, you challenged.
Hesitation.
Definitely, yes. He suddenly realised what he said and hesitated. And you can't say that on Radio 4 or even on the World Service. And but anyway, they probably won't understand. So, 50 seconds for you, Wendy, on dives, starting now.
I was never any good at doing dives when I was at school, when we had swimming lessons.
Tony Hawk's challenge.
As well as thirst, there's no such word as swimming.
I nearly said slimming by mistake. I didn't mean to.
Tony, dives is back with you with another point and 44 seconds starting now.
It was most enjoyable at the Barcelona Olympics because you could see the Sagrada Familia in the background from the high board. I thought how splendid that at last they're having the dives taking place outdoors. So often you are confined in those horrible swimming pools where you can smell the chlorine and you start to become ill with it. But now they've changed things and I'm all for that. Now, another thing I'm very keen to tell you about dives is the fact that we are in one at the...
It's tough, isn't it?
It's not easy, this game, is it?
Yeah, you get the thing after about 25 years.
We won
Yeah,
one.
that's right.
Yes.
So, Derek, your challenge
Which
was
is
right.
much the same as 30.
Yeah. And the 16 seconds with Derek now to tell us something about dives starting now.
Some of the most interesting dives that I've seen have been in the Gulf of Arabia, where they dive for pearls. They generally bring, these days, young fellows from the local...
Clement Freud challenged.
Hesitation.
Oh, you're actually incorrigible. You knew there was about 4 seconds to go, so you pressed your buzzer and then thought of a challenge. So you threw in hesitation because you couldn't think of anything else, and it's wrong. So Derek has 5 seconds to tell us more about dives, starting now.
In former times, they used to bring them from Zanzibar, put pins on their nose and throw them over the edge for 4...
Well, Derek's increased his lead at the end of that round, and the other three are very close following, and but a little bit way behind. Clement. I try to keep it going, you see, and I slip up and I make an absolute mess of it all. The subject, corn. There are 50 seconds. No, there aren't. There's 60. I don't know where I am. Yes, Tony.
I'm challenging on incompetence.
And I'm glad you recognised it, because it was a very good demonstration I was trying to give, but you were the first to spot it.
Thank you.
So Clement Freud, the subject is corn, starting now.
Corn is something produced by farmers who, by and large, are the most splendid people in the entire country. Many of my best friends till the soil in order to produce corn. They go on holiday because they rotate crops, barley, wheat.
Wendy.
Well, you see, he's listing again, isn't he? I mean, I know he hesitated, but you always do this, Clement.
You could only remember barley and wheat. There wasn't much of a list. Couldn't think of any others.
He just started, Derek, then he hesitated, so I buzzed him.
Well, that's all right. You got in with the correct one, so why carp about the fact that he mentioned two things which you thought could be a list?
I'm not talking to you, Nicholas. I'm talking to Derek.
Right, so there are 40 seconds. Corn, starting now.
I'm not mad about corn. When you get that corn on the cob and it's all dripping with butter, it tends to run all down your chin, and if you're not suitably tied up with a napkin, you get it all over your clothes, and it's very difficult.
Tony Hawk's challenged.
Repetition of over.
Yes.
All over your chin and all over your clothes.
Oh, dear.
But anyway, the 25 seconds for you, Tony, on corn, starting now.
Corn is grown in fields, and that's pretty much the extent of my knowledge about corn. However, you can have corn flakes, which are very nice indeed to have in the morning. I noticed that there's a new campaign where they're trying to pretend that old people...
Wendy.
He hesitated.
Yes, he did, Dendy, and you got the subject back. Corn, 10 seconds are left, starting now.
I like cornflakes. I have corn that is covered in some sort of gooey stuff. I think it might be honey and chopped nuts.
Tony Hawk's challenge just before the whistle.
The whistle's put me off now. I think my challenge was going to be you ought to know what you've got on your cornflakes. How can you not know?
I never read the small print.
Oh, I see. I thought
so what is your challenge? Is it deviation or what?
I'd like to...
No, he was just being picky.
Yes,
You must remember, Tony, nobody likes a smart ass.
But Wendy, sometimes you can gain points by being a smart ass in just a minute. But it was an incorrect challenge. So you have another point, which is marvellous, and you only have half a second to keep going. No, 1 second on corn, starting now.
Corn.
And you've been challenged.
Hesitation.
Yes, indeed. So, Clement, you have a quarter of a second on corn, starting now.
Craig.
So, Clement Freud was then speaking as the whistle went, gained an extra point. Derek, we're back with you to begin. The subject, diets. Will you tell us something about that in this game, starting now?
Diets of worms. That always seemed to be an extraordinary thing to eat, but of course it wasn't actually. It was an assembly, a gathering, a parliament. In fact, in Japan, they still call it a diet, their lower house. Of course, you can eat food in limited quantities. Now, I had a hard bypass. Maybe you think about it.
Clement Freud challenge.
That was just disintegration. You name it, he did it. Hesitated, deviated.
I didn't hear him hesitate.
He did, I heard it. I'll back you up, Clement.
He did manage to keep going very quietly. I think for the others, the deaf ones over there, you should speak a little louder.
Oh, right. OK, fine. OK, off we go then.
So I'm on your side on this one, Derek, being utterly fair, and you have another point and 41 seconds on diets starting
And
now.
after this very serious operation, I was put on a low cholesterol diet, so I can't eat butter or fat, which is rather a hardship for me because I do like a juicy pork chop, and this is now denied on to me because...
I'm challenging for unnecessary volume.
Deviation from the normal way he speaks.
Yes,
Well
he was
done,
speaking
Tony.
so loud it was becoming...
So you have 28 seconds to tell us something about diets, starting now.
I'm very fond of the joke which goes, it's good to have the G-plan diet where you have to eat furniture. There have been many other jokes about diet.
Derek Nimmo challenged.
Deviation, I'm not. Very fond of the joke, that's all.
I know he didn't get very much of a reaction. Tony, I disagree with
Got me
his
another
challenge.
point, though, didn't it?
It got you another point, yes, that's the important thing. 19 seconds are left on diets, Tony, starting now.
I'm one of those very lucky people who doesn't really need to diet. I think everyone here will agree I am a slim, lithe figure.
Wendy Richard
He
challenge.
hesitated and he's talking rubbish.
You don't think he's slim and lithe? I think you should
I
show
am.
the
Well, he's a
audience.
bit
Let the
on the
audience
skinny
judge. Will you please
side,
stand up,
It's a
Tony, and show
radio
the audience?
programme, this
Let the
won't-
audience judge. If you think he's slim and lithe, would you cheer for Tony? And if you don't, you now boo for Wendy. Which is where you want... Oh, Wendy, they
Wouldn't
won't-
boo
they-
me,
they-
dear. But he hesitated
No,
anyway.
he didn't hesitate. No,
He did.
No,
Comic timing.
No, he didn't hesitate. There are 9 seconds left with you, Tony, on diet, starting now.
It is very difficult to diet.
Clement Freud challenge.
He's said difficult before.
It was difficult. You did say you were difficult before. You had difficulty with something. I don't know what it was, but it was difficult.
Obviously
7 seconds for
difficulty
you,
in
Clement.
remembering what he said.
7 seconds with you, Clement, on diet, starting now.
As no one in their right senses would call me slim or lithe, I do quite a bit in the way of diets.
Well, the situation then that round is much the same, the three of them trailing Derek Nimmo, who's still in the lead. And Wendy, it is your turn to begin. The subject, Plaice. Will you tell us something about that in just a minute, starting now?
Not being a great fan of meat eating.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Hesitation.
I know, but she hadn't really got going, had
I
she?
don't care a damn.
You let Derek have it. I've just struck him off my Christmas card.
All right, if you want to. 57 seconds, Derek, on Plaice, starting now.
My favourite place in the whole wide world, I think, is Hong Kong. And the very interesting thing about it is that recently there has arrived there Harry Ramsbottom from Leeds, who set up...
Wendy
It's
Richard
Harry
challenge.
Ramsden, isn't it?
That's right.
He said Ram's bottom.
Yeah.
You don't know who I'm going to talk about. You'd let me continue.
I think you're entitled to, actually, Derek. With
He's
40
not. He's not being correct.
Well, we'll find out, and if he isn't, I'll bring it back to you, Wendy. 48 seconds on Plaice with you, Derek, starting now.
Who, as a well-known sinologist, assistant to Custard. And when he recently went, the noble governor, to Beijing, he took with him the aforementioned gentleman because he speaks totally fluent Mandarin and was a tremendous assistant and to Sir Alan Dong, former ambassador.
Tony challenge.
I think he's slurring at the moment.
I couldn't understand
He's
a word
not
he said,
finishing any of his
actually,
words, is he? As a Mr. Mandarin.
Trying to get a bit of a speed up.
yes. We interpret that as hesitation, Tony.
Yeah.
32 seconds on Plaice, starting now.
Fancy coming back to my place is one of my favourite remarks I like to make to people, and I can do this because I am so slim and lithe.
Wendy Richard
He's
challenge.
hesitating.
He did hesitate then, Wendy, yes.
That's the way I talk. I'm just boring.
Wendy, you have 22 seconds on Plaice, starting now.
I like grilled Plaice because Plaice is good for you. It's much better for one's diet than eating any meat.
Clement Freud challenged.
Hesitation.
12 seconds on Plaice with you, Clement, starting now.
When I ask people to come back to my place, I tend to give it to them with tartar sauce. It's made with...
Tony Hawk's challenged.
He's talking about filthy night now, isn't he?
Tony, he may be, but he wasn't deviating from the subject, so give Tony an extra point. We like the challenge. Clement keeps
I didn't
around
like
a
the
point for an
challenge.
incorrect challenge. And 5 seconds to go on Plaice, starting now.
My place is in East Suffolk on the coast between Algebra and Lowestoft.
Well, looking at the clock, I'm sure we're entering the last round. And as we do so, Derek Nimmo is in quite a strong lead, but he's now only 3 points ahead of Tony Hawks. And he's 4 points ahead of Clement Freud. And he's 8 points ahead of Wendy Richard. I don't think Wendy will have much chance, but anybody could still win the game.
Isn't it nice to know that the leader of one ship has such confidence?
Tony, it's your turn to begin. The subject is custard. Can you throw a bit of that about in just a minute, starting now?
Custard is ideal to have on puddings. Some people use custard for other things. Clement Freud, probably, on one of his filthy nights. But we don't need to go into that. For my own part, I enjoy it very much with apple crumble. I used to hate lumpy custard when I was at school. Oh, that used to make me very upset indeed. But now I am a calmer person, and if I am given custard which does not please me, I let it roll off my back like duck's water. Is that the furthest I've got so far?
Deviation, how can you let custard roll off his back?
Come back to my place and I might say.
Derek, you have a correct challenge. 33 seconds on custard, starting now.
Custard is made with egg, milk, and sugar, and is a rather underrated.
Clement Freud challenged.
It isn't, and hesitation.
Which one do you want?
Hesitation.
Good. 27 seconds, Clement, for you to tell us something about custard, starting now.
Custard comes in a tin called Birds, on the outside of which...
Wendy
He
challenged.
hesitated.
No, he didn't hesitate, but custard doesn't. Custard powder comes in a tin called Birds. Is that your challenge?
Are you challenging?
Yes.
No, I'm trying to put words into her mouth, but she's a bit slower than she usually is. So he didn't hesitate, which was your first challenge. 23 seconds for you, Clement, on custard, starting now.
One of the very nicest things you can do with custard, which is a fairly boring food, I always think, is to strew brown sugar over it and hold it very close.
Tony challenged.
I thought he hesitated a bit earlier, but then I'm not sure whether he did in the end, so I'd...
So why did you challenge it then?
But I just thought I'd like to hear my own voice again.
The audience don't have the same opinion from their reaction. Clement, you have another point for an incorrect challenge and 13 seconds on custard, starting now.
The French call it crème brûlée, which is their sort of custard, and as we don't like the people who come from France because their farmers are such filthy, unprincipled...
Tony challenged.
Deviation, he's just trying to ingratiate himself with the farmers in the audience, isn't he?
Well,
we're talking about custard here. You don't make custard on farms.
Oh, yes, he did, actually.
did,
You're right, yes. Just 2 seconds ago. Come on, Tony. Let's hear from you on custard, starting now.
Slim and lithe and bollard.
Well, as I said a little while ago, this was probably going to be the last round, and it has turned out to be so. And just to give you the final score, Clement Freud and Tony Hawks were equal in second place. They were only 2 points behind the one who had most points, so we call him the winner, Derek Nimmo. We do hope that you have enjoyed this edition of Just a Minute and will want to tune in again at the same time next week when we take to the air and we play this delightful game. May I say on behalf of our 4 talented panellists, also Jane Stevens, who's been keeping score and blowing the whistle, and also our producer, Sarah Smith, and the creator of the game, Ian Messiter, and myself, Nicholas Parsons, goodbye.
And you can join Nicholas and the panel again at the same time.
Welcome to Just a Minute. Hello, my name is Nicholas Parsons, and as the Minute Waltz fades away, once more it is my pleasure to welcome the 4 diverse and talented personalities who this week are going to play Just a Minute. We welcome back regular players of the game, Derek Nimmo, Peter Jones and Clement Freud, and one of the more recent regular players of the game, Paul Merton. Will you please welcome all 4 of them? This particular recording of Just a Minute is coming from the beautiful seaside town in North Wales of Llandudno. Beside me, I have this week Jane Stevens to keep the score. And once again, I'm going to ask our 4 players of the game to speak on the subject that I give them, and they will try and do that without hesitation, repetition, or deviating from the subject on the card. And we'll begin the show this week with Clement Freud, and the subject is Wales. A very apt subject to begin this particular edition of Just a Minute. You have 60 seconds as usual, Clement, and the time starts now.
It has long been my ambition to get some whales, befriend them, and form ourselves into a private limited company in order to hire those things out to film studios. The extraordinary thing is that when you go to the cinema, it is almost impossible not to see an epic in which whales do not play a part. Jonah.
And Derek Nimmo has challenged. There was an there, which we interpret as hesitation. So, Derek, you have a correct challenge. You get a point for that. You take over the subject of Wales, and there are 37 seconds left, starting now.
All my children's holidays were taken in Wales. I used to go to Rill and Cricket, the Llandudno, of course, but particularly to Prestatyn. And I can remember now walking over the railway track on the bridge with the warm sun on the wooden sleepers, which are on top of this erection, and then onto the sands, the dunes below, the skylarks, and I learned my very... What's the matter?
Paul Merton has challenged you.
Was there not a repetition of Prestatyn?
You can't have too much of Prestatyn anyway. No. I certainly didn't say it right.
So I'm afraid, Paul, it's another wrong challenge, and Derek, you have a point for an incorrect challenge. 17 seconds for Wales, starting now.
Edward I said that he would present to the nation of Wales a prince that could not speak English, and he handed his baby son, and that became the first leader of the principality.
And Clement Freud has challenged.
Repetition of first.
Yes, you did say first.
Absolutely right, Clay. Well listened.
Yes. Your early childhood, you talk about your first impressions and things like that. Clement, you very cleverly got in with 3 seconds to go. The subject is still Wales, and you start now.
I was asked to join a movement called Protect White Whales.
Just to remind you, whoever is speaking when the whistle goes gets an extra point, and on this occasion it was Clement Freud. And Derek, we'd like you to take the next round, a joke, starting now.
Any action or series of words that is designed to produce laughter, merriment, and mirth can be described as a joke. It also can be applied to a person. It has been cruelly suggested the chairman of this game is a joke. I personally don't subscribe to that theory because he is a very dashing, beblazered chap and far from a joke. So, when you have political conferences and so on, they do tend to throw up a lot of jokes. There was one the other day at the...
Paul Merton challenged.
Hesitation there.
So, Paul, you have a point for a great challenge, and you have 26 seconds to tell us something about a joke, starting now.
Where do you weigh whales at a railway station? This is a joke that I remember hearing when I was about 7 years old, and I think it's possibly the best joke that anyone ever did tell me. When I was 8, I remember hearing the one...
Clement Freud challenge.
Who remembers?
Yes, you did remember too much, I'm afraid, Paul. So Clement got in with a correct challenge with 10 seconds on a joke, starting now.
Signor Agnelli, who is the chairman of Fiat, said any successful company needs an uneven number of directors, and 3 is too many.
Clement's little joke kept him going to the whistle when gained that extra point and has taken the lead at the end of that round. Paul Merton, will you take the next round? The subject, Tenterhooks. Will you tell us something about that subject in this game, starting now?
Every summer when I was a boy, I was on Tenterhooks wondering whether we were going to Prestatyn for our holidays. My parents would surprise me with a holiday brochure at the beginning of June and say, yes, we're going to that resort again. And I would leap with joy and my heels would click together in the air as I realised I was heading to that part of Britain. And as I sat on the beach, I would...
As you sat on the beach, you'll be challenged for hesitation, which was Derek Nimmo, and 38 seconds for you, Derek, to tell us something about tenterhooks, starting now.
Tenterhooks originally was a blanket which was stretched by virtue of these hooks, very tight. And so that's how it actually became part of the language. I myself often am feeling on tenterhooks when I'm anticipating meeting Paul Merton, who I regard with such awe because he has a sharp, razor-like mind. And when I gaze upon his T-shirt...
Peter Jones is challenged at last. Peter, what is your challenge?
Hesitation.
Yes, he did actually. He did slow down an awful lot, didn't he?
Not for very long, but I was there like a razor.
We're sitting beside him, and I think you're a better judge than I am, where I am just a distance away from him. Right, 13 seconds are left for you, Peter, to tell us something about tenterhooks starting now.
2 peanuts walked down a dark alley. One was assaulted. Now, that's one of the jokes that I would like to have introduced into the previous subject. And while I'm about it, my parents had their honeymoon in Wales, and I was born about 3 years later. I've always been rather a late developer.
Yeah. Even in just a minute.
Exactly. So now I come to tenterhooks. How long have I got?
You haven't got it. Derek challenged you after you said about one was assaulted.
Because he was talking about the previous subject rather than the present one.
No.
It's just a slight time warp.
No,
that's
he was on tenterhooks to get that joke out.
That's right, yes. No, I thought it was so good.
Peter, I disagree with the challenge, so you have another point. And you have 9 seconds on tenterhooks, starting now.
I don't know why they're called tenter. I always used to think they were tender, but apparently not. It must come from the Wild West, I suppose, something to do with...
Derek Nimmo challenge.
It doesn't. Tenter, it's from the Latin for tenters.
It's what Derek said earlier on, if you were listening.
I was educationally deprived.
Yes.
And so I wouldn't have known that, you see.
There's 1 second, because Derek has got a correct challenge. Tenterhooks.
Tenterhooks is a very good subject to have on just a minute, and it's surprising how long they hold.
Derek, you got an extra point, of course, for speaking then when the whistle went. And Peter Jones, we'd like you to take the next round. The subject is avoiding tax. You have 60 seconds, as usual, starting now.
Well, I think it's something that practically everybody does except me. When I hear the Prime Minister or the Chancellor of the Exchequer refer to the taxpayer, I always think they must be referring to me. Because it's in the singular, you see. There are not even 2 of us. And it is terribly unfair. I'm told that accountants can help you to avoid paying tax, but I've never found one who could. And even if you do, you have to pay the accountant so much, it's really better to pay...
Paul Merton challenged.
Repetition of accountant.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Well, it is a big firm.
Yes. Give Peter a bonus point. We like that one.
Presumably double-entry bookkeeping is what you're referring to.
But Paul had a correct challenge, so he gets a point. And the subject, 31 seconds, Paul, avoiding tax, starting now.
I avoid tax by working for the BBC, because I know that nobody will ever discover that I actually do appear on Radio 4. It is such a well-kept secret within the organisation of the British Broadcasting Corporation that even the Radio Times covers very little information.
Peter Jones is challenged.
I'm trying to prevent him committing professional suicide. I don't mind sacrificing a point. It's a young life at stake.
So have you a legitimate challenge other than trying to help Paul Merton?
Well, he sort of hesitated very quickly, didn't he?
I think we'll give you a bonus point because we enjoyed the challenge, but Paul Merton gets a point for being interrupted and continues with the subject, and there are 15 seconds left, starting now.
Some people, of course, move abroad...
Clement Freud challenged.
We've had, of course.
You did start off before with saying,
Did
of
I?
course. Yes, I'm afraid
Of course.
you did. Of course you did.
I'm being sponsored by the Of Course Society tonight, who feel that the phrase doesn't crop up enough in the English language. So I'll be saying it again later on.
All right. Clement, you had a correct challenge. 13 seconds are left. Avoiding tax, starting now.
Given a free choice, I would sooner avoid tenterhooks than tax. But if they come raining down from above, there's no good reason why one shouldn't run quickly to the nearest hostelry and drink...
Well, Clement Freud was then speaking as the whistle went, gained an extra point, and he's gone back into the lead, one ahead of Derek Nimmo. Then comes Peter Jones, one behind, and then Paul Merton. Clement, your turn to begin. The subject is Goya. Will you tell us something about that great painter in just a minute, starting now?
Well, I think everybody knows that Goya was a great painter, but what is far less well known is that he was a cricketer of tremendous talent. He played short leg and quite often went to mid-wicket. I've even heard reports that on occasion he tweaked left-handers.
Derek Nimmo challenged.
2 occasions.
Yes, there were 2 occasions there, Clement, I'm afraid. Goya, 42 seconds with you, Derek, starting now.
I suppose with Velázquez, he is one of the 2 greatest Spanish painters. Some
Peter
might...
Jones has challenged.
There was a sort of...
Hesitation, absolutely. That's what
A sort of was a hesitation before. 37 seconds for you, Peter, now on Goya, starting now.
Well, I can say without hesitation, I hope, that he was one of the greatest war artists of all time, and he didn't flinch from showing the gory details and all the horrors that war can bring about.
Clement Freud challenged.
2 wars.
2 wars.
The wars, yes. Well, he did cover more than one.
It's a very big firm, isn't it?
Yes. 25 seconds for you, Clement, on Goya, starting now.
When Goya played football for Tottenham Hotspur, he was extraordinarily smart on the left side. He was, sadly, a one-footed footballer. There was not much point passing the ball to him unless he was in the right position, but then his shot was dazzling. Goalkeepers around the world feared his action, and he was smart with his
Merton
head.
challenged.
Deviation, not goalkeepers around the world feared his actions. Surely only those in the first division. Why would a goalkeeper in Brazil fear this bloke playing for Tottenham?
If he was such a fine striker of the ball, then obviously every goalkeeper around the world might be inhibited by the thought of playing against him. So, metaphorically speaking,
Absolute rubbish, wasn't it, really?
You're playing the game, I'm not, so why would you challenge him?
Even by the abysmally low standards of this programme, it was absolute rubbish.
I thought you were going to be quite interesting about it.
Well, I would have done some fool.
Well, I
interrupting.
suppose you have to be a Clement Freud to get away with such rubbish. You did it with great style, Clement. You have another point, 3 seconds left on Goya, starting now.
What made it so difficult for him was having a painter of the same name.
Speaking as the whistle went, gained an extra point and has increased his lead. Derek, it's your turn to begin. Would you take the subject of donkey work? And there are 60 seconds as usual, starting now.
I suppose donkey work is the sort of work that nobody really wants to do. It is the kind of position that people on the very lowest
Paul
level...
Merton challenged.
A severe hesitation.
I got my stutter's getting very bad tonight. It's making fun
You've
of
been
cricket.
reminded of your childhood back in North Wales.
Well, that's
and
right.
All those
when I
sort
used to
of
go
little-
out for prestatin.
Paul, you've got in with 52 seconds and the subject is donkey work, starting now.
When I wasn't enjoying holidays in Prestatyn, I was going down to Blackpool Beach, where the donkeys would do a good turn for the kids by taking them up and down the sandy bit on their backs. I remember one particular donkey...
Derek Nimmo challenged.
Why were the children being pulled along on their backs?
I think we'll give you a bonus point. We like the challenge, but I think he did make it clear now, under the pressure of keeping going, that the children were put on the backs of the donkeys. So, Paul, you were interrupted. You have another point, and you have 39 seconds. Donkey work starting now.
I remember the skin being scraped off my spine just here as these donkeys dragged me along the aforementioned path.
Peter Jones has challenged.
Well, dragged me along, or dragged, at any rate. He said that before, didn't he?
I did, yes.
Yes, you did. Right.
I'll say it again, given another chance.
Peter, you had the subject of donkey work. 31 seconds are left, starting now.
Yes, well, it is really drudgery, or very hard, unpleasant labour, like digging a hole in the road. And you often see people looking and saying, these men, they don't like work, you know. Look at them, he's leaning on his shovel. This is after he's been there for about 2 hours.
Derek Nimmo challenged.
Hesitation.
I think there was.
Was there? No.
In other words, you want to hear from Peter Jones a bit more, do you? All right, then. Well, the judges. Peter, they're on your side.
Oh, how long is that?
The 16 seconds.
Oh, I see.
they're your audience, you see. They want to hear more from you, so it's up to you now.
Just a Welsh name, you see.
Well, Peter, you have 16 seconds, and you start now.
Well, it was Mary and Joseph who really made the donkey famous and put it on the map by taking them to this stable at Christmas time.
And Derek Nimmo challenge, yes.
Definitely enough.
Definite there. I won't have the audience say anything against that one. So, Derek, you have the subject of donkey work, 8 seconds, starting now.
When our Lord entered in triumph into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, it was on the back of a donkey. And that is why the stigmata on...
Well, it's a very close contest this week. Derek Nimmo's just jumped back into the lead with that extra point. Paul, it's your turn to begin. The subject, a perfect day. There are 60 seconds, as usual, starting now.
My idea of a perfect day is to go down to Blackpool and listen to the kids screaming as the donkeys drag them backwards along the beach. I can't get enough of this. In fact, I take a tape recorder down with me and record...
Derek Nimmo challenge.
2 downs.
Derek, you've got in there with 47 seconds to go on a perfect day, starting now.
My idea of a perfect day is to set forth on a slow train from London up to Crewe, sit there for an hour and a half, change in one to Chester, and then come on to Llandudno Junction, which isn't the place you're trying to get to at all. It's quite a long way away. But when you actually arrive and see yourself surrounded by smiling faces, often chatting to you in Welsh, Keep Arcarisco, which means the schoolmistress's little dog.
Sorry, Clement Freud has challenged you.
Oh, really?
Yes, Clement.
He stopped.
He certainly hesitated, yes.
Yep.
So, Clement,
That's
you have
what we
another
call
point, and you have 21 seconds, a perfect day, starting now.
I think a perfect day should start now in Llandudno and go gently down the coast through the city of St Asaph, up to Rill, to Colwyn Bay, where they've closed the pier.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Well, you can't go from St Asaph to Colwyn Bay.
Derek, you have the subject back. 8 seconds, a perfect day, starting now.
Walk along the pier and breathe in the ozone and retire to a handily adjacent...
Closed, I've said.
Of course it's not closed at Llandudno. I think we should broadcast that fact, don't you?
The Llandudno Tourist Board is very pleased with this programme.
Derek, it was a wrong challenge. You have 5 seconds on a perfect day, starting now.
And into a fish and chip shop and getting some salt and vinegar and a well-worn copy of the Liverpool...
Peter Jones, your turn to begin. The subject, nuts. Will you tell us something about it?
Well, if I were Clement Freud, I suppose I'd just start giving you a list of them, like coconuts, hazel, pea, and so on. But what can one say about nuts, except that they are a secondary sort of source of protein. They're quite good for vegetarians to eat, as long as you chew them up well and eat plenty of green stuff with them. They are...
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of eat, I'm
Yes,
afraid.
you did say eat.
Well, it wasn't very interesting anyway, was it?
Paul, you have another point. Well, you have 41 seconds. The subject is nuts, starting now.
Nuts is one of those colloquial terms for people who have a mental instability. It's a rather unfair description, but is one that is often used. Many years ago, it was the practice of people of London to go to Bedlam Hospital to look at the nuts there inside. And this was when we had a very bad view of what it was to be mentally ill.
Clement Freud challenge.
Hesitation,
yes, Clement.
I was trying to turn it into a song, actually.
21 seconds are left, and the subject is still nuts. Clement, starting now.
GNUTS is how Dan Quayle would spell nuts, which is actually quite wrong. It is an enormously important and successful source of protein. I think cashews and Brazils are those which are most calorific and therefore...
Well, it's still neck and neck in the lead. Clement Freud is now only one behind a leader, Derek Nimmo. And Clement, it's your turn to begin. The subject, estate agents. Will you tell us something about that much maligned group of people starting now.
I really know very little about estate agents, other than they're always moaning about not having any work to do, and tend to become Conservative members of Parliament, where they bore everybody greatly. There's one called Vivian Bendall. I can't remember what his seat is, but he was an estate agent and went on throughout his career in the House being known as one of that company. Anyone who wanted to sublet or rent a house or flat would go to this good man, he wasn't really that terrific, and say, can you accommodate me? There's a lot of commission available if you would do what I...
Peter Jones challenged.
Hesitation.
23 seconds are left for you, Peter, on estate agents starting now.
Estate agents always seem to get a very bad press. You don't often meet people who like them. But my experience has been that if you treat an estate agent kindly, like you might a boa constrictor or something like that, it can become quite friendly and helpful.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Can. He's sort of stuttered.
I stuttered.
I'm sitting next to him. Can.
But he kept going. I mean, you didn't challenge him for repetition
it's
of can.
the pot calling the kettle black.
Peter, you keep the subject and you have 6 seconds starting now.
They are one of the worst kind of agents, and I've come across very many theatrical agents and tough...
So at the end of that round, Peter Jones spoke as the whistle went, gained an extra point. And Derek, it's your turn to begin. The subject is my mistake. Can you tell us something about my mistake, starting now?
I think one of my mistakes was not being able to get into the subject of nuts, because I would have liked to have talked about lunatics for a while, particularly the one who escaped from an asylum, assaulted a laundress, and then fled. And the headline the next day in the Sun was, nuts, screws, washers and bolts. I always think it was a great mistake that I wasn't able to penetrate that particular question. And it's something that I will always...
Clement Freud challenged you at the end of your joke.
It's a repetition of nuts.
Nuts.
We're talking about my mistake.
Might have been a mistake, actually, to tell that story. You'll never know. And Clement Freud, you have a correct challenge. You have 40 seconds. My mistake, starting now.
My mistake was to go into a restaurant and order turtle soup. And having done so, I waited for 35 minutes and left. Whereupon the restaurateur came up and said, you can't, chasing behind me as I was walking down the street. I said, I certainly can. I ordered this delicacy, which is either made by opening a tin and pouring the content onto a plate, or by using the beast and soaking him for days on end. If you're unable to do the former, I'm not prepared to wait for the latter. I think it was a mistake because, as a consequence, I didn't get dinner that night. It was in Southampton. There was no one else.
Well, Clement Freud, with his points, including one for speaking as whistle went, has now taken the lead, one ahead of Derek Nimmo. Paul Merton, your turn to begin. The subject, algebra. Will you tell us something about that in this game, starting now?
Algebra is a very small country just off the coast of Spain. The people who live there live in all kinds of rude huts. These are various houses with 2 fingers sticking out of the roof. That is why I referred to them earlier as I did. The algebraic people are a kindly race, but they don't get on very well with their near neighbours, who are the people of the island of geometry. There is a great war between these two. Geometry,
Derek Nimmo challenged.
2 geometries.
And you always tell me you did woodwork at school.
Well, quite clearly I did, as I didn't do algebra.
30 seconds for you, Derek, on algebra, starting now.
Algebra was the one goalkeeper who was not frightened of Goya when he was playing centre forward. Oh, Algebra was tremendously popular because he managed to repel every ball that was kicked towards him and retired to live in the south of Spain because, as the name suggests, it is, of course, of Arab origin.
Clement Freud challenged.
I don't know. I just thought it was a good time to stop.
Might have been a good time to stop, but 10 seconds for you, Derek. Algebra starting now.
So many of these mathematical sciences...
Peter Jones, a challenge.
Hesitation.
Peter, you have 7 seconds to tell us something about algebra starting now.
Well, that's too long to talk about the algebra that I know about, because I had a very bad time at school.
But you kept going, in spite of that, until the whistle went, Peter. This is the last round, I have to tell you. And as we enter the last round, Derek Nimmo is still in the lead, only 2 ahead of Peter Jones and Clement Freud, equal. And Derek, it's your turn to begin. The subject is spring. Will you tell us something about that delightful subject in this game, starting now?
One of the nicest kind of spring waters that I know is called Hepburn Spa, and it comes from a place called Dalesford, which is just outside Ballarat, which is tolerably near to Melbourne in Victoria in Australia. It was purchased by an impresario called Harry Miller, who put it into these canisters and sold it for an absolute fortune. I once did a calculation, you know, that Perrier water, if it was put into an oil can, is worth £110 per great big barrel, whereas...
Freud challenged.
Repetition of water.
Yes, you had water, and the subject is spring, not spring water, I'm afraid. And there are 32 seconds left on spring, starting now.
I shared an office for many years with that famous failed anorexic Sir Cyril Smith, who had a company called Springs. His first name preceded it. And he knew more about Springs than anybody I've ever met. He employed many people and looked after them well, and there was a profit-sharing scheme. And Springs came out of Rochdale.
Peter Jones has challenged.
He has repeated the plural of spring.
He did say springs more than once, and spring is the subject on the card. So well listened, Peter. You've got in on the last round with 5 seconds to go on spring, starting now.
It is one of the most delightful of the seasons because it applies mostly...
As I said before, this was to be the last round, so what I have to do now is to give you the final position. Only 1 point ahead and equal, we have 2 joint winners this week, which is Derek Nimmo with Peter Jones. Would you please congratulate them? Well, we hope you've enjoyed this particular edition of Just a Minute, which has come from the lovely seaside town of Llandudno. And it only remains for me to say on behalf of our 4 players of the game, and Jane Stevens, who's kept the score for the first time absolutely admirably, also the creator of the game, Ian Messiter, and our producer, Sarah Smith. Thank you for listening. We hope that you'll be with us the next time you'll hear us playing Just a Minute. Until then, from me, Nicholas Parsons, goodbye. Welcome to Just a Minute. Hello, my name is Nicholas Parsons, and as the minute waltz fades away, once more it is my pleasure to welcome the 4 exciting personalities who this week are going to play Just a Minute. And we welcome back 3 regular players of the game, Clement Freud, Peter Jones and Paul Merton, and we welcome, for the first time playing the game, Caroline Quentin. Will you please welcome all 4 of them? Jane Stevens is sitting beside me, I'm delighted to say. She's going to keep the score. And once again, or as usual, I'm going to ask our 4 panellists, our players of the game, to speak on the subject that I give them, and they will try and do that without hesitation, repetition, or deviating from the subject, if they can. Peter Jones, will you begin the show this week? The subject, the year ahead. Will you tell us something about that in this game, starting now?
In 1993, a number of predictable things are bound to happen. A cabinet minister will resign in order to spend more time with his family. And at some point, a duck with a number of ducklings will cross the mall and be photographed on the front pages of several of the cheaper newspapers. And there'll be trouble with El Dorado. And I shan't be reported as leaving the country, but I may easily do so. And that may get us, perhaps I'm floundering now, rather, as you can imagine. I hadn't expected to go on.
You were floundering and nobody challenged you for ages. Paul, what is your challenge?
Yeah, hesitation, I'm afraid.
Yeah, there are 22 seconds left. You get a point, of course, for a correct challenge. You take over the subject, and it is the year ahead starting now.
I can see the year ahead unfolding in a fairly predictable way. January, followed by February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and finally December. I think the days of the week will be more or less along the same lines.
Well, Paul's clever ploy kept him going until the whistle went. And whoever is speaking at that moment gets an extra point. It was Paul Merton, and of course, naturally, he's in the lead. Clement, Freud, will you take the next round? The subject, cash. Will you tell us something about that in 60 seconds, if you can, starting now?
Cash is the first name of probably the most stylish and successful jockey, Cash Asmussen, who comes from a Scandinavian family, was born in the United States and rides now in France. He's married to a woman called Florence, known as Cash Flow, which is... and I think is possibly best remembered because he rode the winner of the Ascot Gold Cup, Royal Gate, and was subsequently disqualified for reasons which nobody could quite fathom out, although the stewards said it was a good decision. Cash Asmussen, I've said that twice.
Nobody challenged you, because nobody knows enough about racing to know whether you're talking rubbish or factual information.
Oh, you'll be sorry you said that.
I know. Paul, you challenge then.
Repetition.
Yes, of what?
Well, I couldn't... It's something like Angus Wilson, I think.
Yes, you're right, Paul.
Yes.
20 seconds for you left on the subject of cash, starting now.
Pat Cash won the Wimbledon Championship in 1987, I believe.
Clement Freud challenge.
Didn't.
Which year was it?
Was not 87.
Yes, but I believe that, though. I may be wrong to believe it, but it is one of my most dearest held beliefs. And I shall go to prison to defend my right to believe it.
Well, your belief is so sincere, we believe that you actually knew it and it was incorrect. So, Clement, you have the subject back and you have 15 seconds on cash starting now.
Cash has become an almost unacceptable alternative to cheques, notes, promissory...
Promissory pauses.
Hesitation, I'm afraid.
Yeah, 7 seconds for you on cash, Paul, starting now.
Cash did not win the...
Repetition of win.
Clement, you've got back another point for a correct challenge. 6 seconds left, cash, starting now.
Pat Cash, an Australian, played at Wimbledon in the men's singles, won the final.
Well, at the end of that round, Paul Merton and Clement Freud have got most of the points. And Caroline, it is your turn to begin. The subject, dating agencies. And would you try and tell us something about dating?
Dating?
Dating, yes, already, whatever you like about it. Anyway, something about it. I know we go to India and lots of other countries, and I sometimes think Indian or Chinese, and I go relate that to you.
I'd stick to English if I were you.
Yeah. So, the subject is dating agencies, right. Caroline, starting now.
I have much experience of dating agencies. When I was single, I used to go to one called Bores Are Us. And because I'm an actress, they used to try and set me up with lots of different people, mostly politicians. I used to go out for dinner with them and be very, very bored. And also because I was an actress, I used to be made to... I've said actress about 20 times and nobody's stopped me.
Paul Merton, new challenge.
Repetition of actress, I'm afraid.
Yes. How clever of you to have spotted it. 40 seconds for you, Paul, on dating agencies starting now.
My favourite dating agency is just round the corner from where I live. It's called Bores Are Us, and I go there every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and all those other days of the week I mentioned earlier. I go in and I ask for a particular type of woman, what a particular type.
Caroline Quentin.
I think that's hesitation.
I definitely think it was too, Caroline, and so you've got the subject back. 26 seconds starting now.
I used to meet my date on the concourse of Waterloo Station. I'd be standing there with a copy of The Sporting Life under my arm. I'll never forget once I looked across and I saw a very handsome man. I gazed into his eyes and I thought, this one, he's the man for me. And I'm glad to say...
Peter Jones, a challenge.
Repetition of man.
Yes, that
true,
man
I can't
came too
deny
much into your life. I'm sorry, Caroline.
There were two men.
Peter, 9 seconds. Are left for dating agencies starting now.
I've never actually patronised a dating agency, but I suppose I've got plenty of time. And it may be that it's
Well, Peter Jones is then speaking as a whistle went and gained that extra point. And Peter, it's your turn to begin. The subject, position. Can you talk on it starting now?
in such a very...
Caroline Quentin challenge.
Hesitation.
Yes, you put an in.
Really?
Yes.
I'm so used to doing it that I don't notice.
58 seconds for you, Caroline, on position, starting now.
My favourite position is on top of the Eiffel Tower, I was about to say. I love to look over Paris towards Sacré-Cœur and then down the Champs-Élysées, seeing the Parisians sitting outside their cafes, drinking their absinthe, singing their songs.
Peter Jones challenge.
They're not drinking absinthe now and haven't for at least 40 years.
It's a fair comment.
They're not allowed to sell it.
I'm sure there are some Parisians who drink absinthe. I mean, doesn't mean to say
They
that...
wouldn't be sitting outside cafes drinking it. They'd be huddled up in little dungeons somewhere.
I've got very good eyesight.
I think the image that she created of these Parisians, some of them were drinking absinthe. There's no reason why she shouldn't have coloured them with absinthe.
Coloured them with absinthe. Well, I know.
39 seconds, Caroline. You have a point for incorrect challenge. You continue on position, starting now.
Those that I can't see drinking that certain substance are drinking wine.
Paul Merton.
Yes.
Repetition of drinking, I'm
Yes,
afraid.
you got caught up in the alcohol again. Right, 35 seconds for you, Paul, on position, starting now.
Absinthe make the heart grow fonder is an expression... Oh, thank you very much. It's something that I learned at my father's knee, who had a penchant for...
Caroline Quentin Jones.
Well, pronunciation and deviation.
What was wrong with his pronunciation?
It was just strange and sort of London-like.
I thought it was a London-like attempt at putting on a French accent.
But deviation was my point, anyway.
Deviation from what, though?
Well, from position.
No, I think he was making his position quite clear. No, I disagree with the challenge, Caroline. 24 seconds on position with you, Paul, starting now.
My father had a penchant which he used to wear.
We've already had
Yeah,
this
you've
summer.
had your penchant too much.
But I did it with a more London accent that time.
23 seconds for you, Clement, on position, starting now.
One of my favourite positions is sitting at the top of Canary Wharf, looking down the Thames and watching the bargees drinking light ale, bitter, Guinness, whiskey, gin, rum with lime and soda. Chunks of ice can be heard as far as Billingsgate on a good afternoon.
So, Paul Merton's now taken the lead. He's one ahead of Clement Freud, and then Peter Jones and Caroline Quentin in that order. And Clement, it is your turn to begin. The subject, customs. Will you tell us something about that subject in this game, starting now?
It appears that if you are a member of the EC, customs are no longer valid. You can bring into this country absolutely anything you like. But it is astonishing.
Peter Jones, a challenge.
You can't bring absinthe.
Listen, for those who are less informed than you, Peter, what's this thing about absinthe? I mean, it's still brewed. It is
No,
still...
it's an illegal substance. You're not allowed to sell it or buy it.
Well, I've got a glass here.
Makes people go blind and generally...
I think I've got a glass here.
I thought that was another... Right, Peter, I give you the benefit of the doubt.
God knows the purpose of the game is to try to stop the other people so that you can speak yourself, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, then, that's what I was
And
doing.
absent makes the hard go stronger. Right, anyway. 49 seconds for you, Peter, on customs starting now.
I can remember coming back from France in the middle of winter, and my friend and I were driving back, and we got on this ferry with a car.
Caroline, challenge.
Hesitation, ferry.
You put another in, Peter.
Yes, sorry.
Some of the other regulars let you get away with it, but
Yes,
Caroline's
I know.
got
They could take us
fighting
out
for
of
a
the
corner over
recording
there.
if they were genuine.
Caroline, there are 40 seconds for you to tell us something about customs starting now.
I always get terrified whenever I'm going through customs, regardless of whether or not I'm carrying any illegal goods, absinthe, guns, anything like that. I seem to get nervous because the officers look at you as if you're hiding something. I colour up, I go red, and then I chat...
Paul Merton challenge.
Hesitation, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I was testing.
Paul, 23 seconds to tell us something about customs starting now.
My father had a few unusual customs. He particularly enjoyed getting up on a Friday morning and taunting the milkman's horse with various songs from the hit shows. He would sing Oklahoma, Corn as High as an Elephant's Eye, and this aforementioned dairy worker.
Clement Freud.
Hesitate.
Yes, 6 seconds for you on customs, Clement, starting now.
Customs and excise are responsible for collecting value-added tax.
With that sombre thought, Clement Freud was speaking. When the whistle went, gained an extra point. He's now equal in the lead with Paul Merton. And we move to Caroline Quentin to begin the next round. Caroline, the subject, services. Will you tell us something about that? After telling us about your dating agency, I'm terrified of what you're going to say about services now. 60 seconds, as usual, starting now.
There are lots of sorts of different services. There are wedding services, funeral services, bus services, dinner services. But I think my favourite sort of service is that of a christening. I love to go and stand in the back of the church, watch the baby cry, the mother cry. Oops, the father...
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of cry.
Yeah, there was too much weeping there.
There
I'm
was.
afraid.
I wept.
43 seconds are left for you, Paul, to tell us something about services starting now.
I would often like to... What am I talking about?
Caroline.
No idea what I was talking about.
It's not your night, really, is
No,
it?
no, no. My basic grasp of English let me down yet again.
Right, Caroline, 39 seconds for you to tell us more about services starting now.
Another service I like to go to is a wedding service. It doesn't really matter if I know anybody, I just...
Peter Jones, a challenge.
Repetition of service. Oh, no, of course, that's the subject.
Actually,
Sorry.
you're right,
Oh, yeah,
Peter.
you are right.
The subject on the card is services, and she repeated service.
Ah, well, what a bit of luck.
So there are 34 seconds for you, Peter, to tell us something about services starting now.
The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines are services. Generally speaking, I think British character doesn't really fit in very well with the idea of performing a service, as waiters and schoolmasters and various people demonstrate every day of our lives, because it means that they're in a position when they have to do what they're told or requested to do. And
Caroline, challenge.
Repetition of do.
Yes, have to do what they're requested to do.
oh, that's very pernickety.
I know. But she hasn't played the game before, and she's making...
She's been rehearsing this for months. She must have
Well, it's paid off anyway, isn't it? So, Caroline, you've cleverly got him with 7 seconds to go on services starting now.
Hesitation, I'm afraid.
Yes. 6 seconds for you, Paul, on services starting now.
My...
Right, clearly hesitation.
Yes, definitely. 5.5 seconds on services with you, Caroline.
One of my favourite services was my own wedding.
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of favourite.
Yes, you talked about your favourites before, I'm afraid, Caroline. Look, she's really tense now. You better watch out.
I'm not tense, I'm angry.
Yes. 3 seconds on services, Paul, starting now.
Aunt Ada worked below the stairs.
Well, a lot of points were scored in that round, including extra one for Paul Merton speaking as the whistle went, and Paul is in a strong lead ahead of Clement Freud, and then comes Caroline Quentin and Peter Jones in that order, and very little to separate the three of them. Paul Merton, your turn to begin. The subject, what I do when I am not here. What I do when I'm not here, 60 seconds, starting now.
I lie... It's gone again.
I know. Obviously nothing. Peter, you challenged.
Yes.
Yes.
Hesitation.
59 seconds. What I do when I'm not here, Peter, starting now.
Well, that occupies most of the time. I mean, I'm only here about 3 hours in a year, so it's asking a lot to concentrate that into the period of a minute or even 59 seconds, which I believe I have to spare. Well, I spend most of it asleep, of course, when I'm not here, I mean. Some of it I spend asleep when I am actually here.
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of a sleep.
I know. I think we almost went to sleep as you were talking, Peter, actually. It wasn't one of your more inspired efforts, but...
Don't worry.
38 seconds. I think it's a very difficult
You're still
subject.
high from your success at Mansfield in the pantomime.
I know.
He's very big in Mansfield.
Yeah,
he is.
Very big in
Terrific.
Mansfield.
A tinge of bitterness in
Is
there.
anyone
I think
here
the
from
audience got it,
Mansfield?
actually, yes.
No one's come down to see you, you see.
38 seconds for you now, Paul, on what I do when I'm not here, starting now.
I lie in a darkened room with the light off, obviously, otherwise it wouldn't be absent of any kind of white substance, which I...
Caroline challenge.
What? I don't know what white substance is. I don't know what that means.
Yes, a
I
white
think light's the word you were looking for, but you didn't dare say it.
Yes, I'd already said it, so...
29 seconds. What I do when I am not here, starting now.
What I do when I'm not here is potter about in the garden. I've been planting my bulbs this week. Tulips, crocuses, daffodils. I got my spade out and I dug a great big trench down at the bottom of the garden.
Clement Freud challenged.
2 gardens.
There were too many gardens,
You
yes.
said white stuff.
I saw the trouble it got you into.
Clement, 16 seconds on what I do when I'm not here, starting now.
What I do when I'm not here is to go to Canary Wharf. Look down the shimmering River Thames, where there are all sorts of people on boats and barges and ships consuming egg sandwiches.
This is obviously a new ploy in just a minute, to use the same material for every round, if you possibly can.
You've been getting away with it for years.
Right, the score. Clement Freud and Paul Merton are equal now in the lead, followed by Caroline Quentin and then Peter Jones and Caroline. Your turn to begin. The subject, etc. That's an interesting subject to talk about. Can you do it in the game starting now?
My favourite film is The King and I,
Paul Merton challenge.
Deviation before her favourite film was The Great Escape.
57 seconds to tell us something about etc. starting now.
One of my favourite films is where Yul Brynner tries to escape from a prisoner of war camp on the back of Deborah Carr. It is a marvellous sequence as the two of them gallop towards the hills, the electrified fence looming ahead of them. She puts on an extra spurt of speed and the two of them leap over this aforementioned man-made structure. And the other side...
Peter Jones is challenged.
A repetition.
Of what?
I don't know, but he said it was aforementioned.
All right, Peter, you get a point because we enjoyed the challenge, but you interrupted, so Paul gets a point for a wrong challenge and keeps the subject, and there are 35 seconds left, etc., starting now.
I suppose this phrase refers to whatever else comes along. You can say, well, I went to the railway station, I took my luggage, I took my handbag.
And Clement Freud challenge.
Two tooks.
I took. Yes. Clement, you have 26 seconds to tell us something about etc., starting now.
This blind parachutist was told that it was really no trouble at all descending from a plane sightless with a parachute and that sort.
Paul Merton challenge.
Well, this is just rubbish. This has got nothing to do with etc. This is deviation from the subject.
Well, you haven't yet established, and you've been going for nearly 10 seconds, anything
Just
about
a minute
etc.
ago, Paul, you were talking about Yulbrynner on a motorcycle. And a lot of other...
Electrified fence.
And you have this sauce to accuse him of calling rubbish.
Oh, dear, yes,
Can't be
it's
right.
a difficult decision, isn't it? Paul, you have 16 seconds on etc., starting now.
I once appeared in a television programme called etc. that was made in the southern television area. It was...
Clement Freud challenge.
Two televisions.
Yes,
in very few words.
yes. 9 seconds for you, Clement, to tell us more about etc., starting... Well, tell us something about etc., starting now.
How will I know when to land, etc., etc., said this poor...
Caroline challenge.
Hesitation.
Yes, I agree. He was searching there, wasn't he? 2 seconds, etc. With you, Caroline, starting now.
Etc., 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 sang the king as he whirled... Oh, hooray!
Well, it's still a close contest out in front there. Caroline spoke when the whistle went. She's increased her position, but she's still quite a few points behind our joint leaders, who are still Paul Merton and Clement Freud. And Paul, your turn to begin. The subject, punnets. Can you tell us something about that subject in this game, starting now?
A few years ago, Pat Cash won the Wimbledon tennis title, and he was won by...
Caroline challenge.
The foreign language.
I was trying to keep him happy in India, actually. A rare form of Urdu.
Yes. Caroline, 53 seconds on punnets, starting now.
I've noticed lately that punnets aren't made out of the same thing they used to be made out of. They used to have...
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of made out.
Yeah. 48 seconds, Paul, on punnets, starting now.
Strawberries are often displayed in punnets at rather exorbitant prices. This particular fruit, for some reason, costs an absolute fortune in midsummer when you may be watching some kind of outdoor sport, particularly maybe an Antipodean is in the lead. You don't know. Who can say? You eat these aforementioned... this aforementioned...
Caroline challenged.
Repetition.
Of what?
Of aforementioned.
No, he didn't. Aforementioned was in the other round. Paul, you still have the subject. 25 seconds on punnets, starting now.
George Punnets was a Victorian inventor, and his great discovery was the small basket in which you could put all kinds of various substances. But most people prefer to place emulsion paint within this little wooden structure.
Caroline challenge.
It's just crap, isn't it? I'm sorry. No one's ever put emulsion paint in a punnet. And if they have, they're a fool because they've got holes in the bottom.
If you were in your cups, you might put your emulsion paint into anything, you know. I think I would be generous on this occasion, Caroline. 11 seconds on punnets with you, starting now.
Raspberries come in punnets. The punnets have little holes in the bottom to...
Clement Freud challenge.
Oh, did I?
Yes.
I certainly didn't mean to.
Well, that means, as Caroline was interrupted, she gets a point for the interruption. 7 seconds are left with you, Caroline, on punnets, starting now.
They have these so that the fruit in the punnet is kept fresh and no mould grows on it. When they're in the shop...
Caroline was speaking again when the whistle went. And this is going to be the last round. And Peter, it's your turn to begin. And the subject is piffle. Will you talk on the subject starting now?
Well, we really have heard a great deal of it tonight, haven't we? All about Paul's father and his knee, where Paul sat when he was told about...
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of Paul's.
You mentioned Paul twice.
You've never bothered about having your name broadcast before. quite the reverse. I thought I was giving you a bit of publicity.
51 seconds for you, Paul, to take over the subject of piffle, starting now.
George Piffle was one of the foremost Victorian inventors. He would have invented punnets, but...
Clement Freud challenge.
I thought he said invented twice, but he said invented.
No, it was invented in the last round.
He's just recycling his own materials.
46 seconds, punnets. Still with you, Paul, starting now.
I watched a film on BBC Two the other day called Brothers-in-Law, which featured a very young Nicholas Parsons. He played the part of I don't know, I suppose you would call him a racing car enthusiast, and his performance was absolute piffle. You could see the other members of the cast looking away in remorse and anger that such an amateur should have been hired for what, after all, was a rather prestigious movie. Amongst the other players was Richard Attenborough and the other guy, what's his name?
Clement Freud challenge.
The repetition of other.
Yes, and of course deviation, because what he said was blatantly untrue. As anybody else who saw the film will testify, I'm sure. Why did you clap when he said my performance was piffle? Clement, you have a correct challenge, 14 seconds on piffle, starting now.
Piffle is a small market town in Leicestershire, which is particularly well known for the good pies and bakeries which are made in the local hostelry.
Caroline Quentin challenge.
Surely a bakery, the building, can't be made in the hostelry.
Since there's no such place as piffle, I can't see the point.
But what amazed me is why you never challenged Peter. And there are 3 seconds to you to continue in this vein on piffle, starting now.
Pontificating about geographic inaccuracies.
Well, Clement Freud was then speaking as a whistle when gained an extra point, and now it only remains for me to give you the final score in this particular edition of Just a Minute. Peter Jones did finish in 4th place. Caroline Quentin, who's never played the game before, got lots of points. But very fairly, out in the lead, equal, were Clement Freud and Paul Merton. So let's call them the winners this week. We do hope you've enjoyed this edition of Just a Minute. It only remains for me to say thank you to the creator of the game, Ian Messiter, our producer, Sarah Smith. From them and from me, Nicholas Parsons, we hope that you'll be with us next time we play Just a Minute. Bye-bye. Welcome to Just a Minute. Hello, my name is Nicholas Parsons, and as the Minute Waltz fades away, once more it's my pleasure to welcome the 4 exciting personalities who this week are going to play Just a Minute. And we welcome 3 of our regular players of the game, Derek Nimmo, Peter Jones and Paul Merton, and we welcome, playing it for the first time, Richard Morton. Would you please welcome all 4 of them? Beside me sits Jane Stevens, who's going to keep the score, and she'll also blow a whistle when 60 seconds are up. And as always, I ask our 4 competitors to speak on the subject that I give them, and they try and do that, of course, without hesitation, repetition, or deviating from the subject on the card in front of me. And let us begin the show this week with Peter Jones. Peter, the subject is custard pie humour. Will you tell us something about that in this game, starting now?
Well, it's never appealed to me terribly, partly because it's not often realistic. The custard isn't genuine, it seems to me. It's often white and it's shaving cream. In fact, I know that from experience because I've actually had to throw one in a television show. Usually they fake it, of course.
Derek, you challenged.
Hesitation.
Yes,
Cough.
Derek, you've got him with the correct challenge. You get a point for that, of course, and there are 41 seconds left for custard pie humour starting now.
Custard pie humour really came into vogue, I suppose, during the silent movies with Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. You think of throw...
Paul Merton has challenged.
What's the matter?
Deviation. Buster Keaton never used custard pies.
You're quite right. Buster Keaton didn't. No. It was more Chaplin.
Era, I said. The era, if you've been listening.
I was listening, and so were the audience, and so was Paul Merton, and I agree with Paul's challenge. So, Paul, 35 seconds on custard pie humour, starting now.
It is certainly true to say that within the silent screen era, there were very few examples of custard pies. Perhaps the most famous one was The Battle of the Century, a short film made by Laurel and Hardy in 1927 that took the concept of custard pie throwing to its ultimate ridiculous level. A company was supplying the custard pies. I believe there was 15,000 of them that were used over the course of a 5-day shoot. The film itself is about 20...
Derek Nimmo challenged.
Hesitation.
No, he didn't hesitate. He repeated the word film, and that's why he paused.
If he paused, it's surely that must be a hesitation.
All right, Derek, I think I've tripped myself up out of my own mouth, so there we are.
So through your stupidity, I've lost a point. This is a handicap for all of us, isn't it?
And occasionally, through my stupidity, you've gained points. 5 seconds for you, Derek, on custard pie humour, starting now.
Laurel and Hardy were acknowledged to be the great exponents of custard pie humour.
When Jane blows her whistle, it tells us that 60 seconds are up, and whoever is speaking that moment gains an extra point. It was Derek Nimmo, who, of course, is in the lead. Paul, the subject now is fluffing. Would you talk on fluffing in 60 seconds if you can, starting now?
Before I had a compact disc collection, I used to collect... I could have said collect. I was going to try and...
Derek, you challenge.
Hesitation.
Yes. 56 seconds are left. Fluffing's with you, Derek, starting now.
My introduction to fluffing was at Elia Station in the Grampians in Western Australia, where during the time of the shearing...
Paul Merton challenge.
Slight hesitation.
A slight hesitation, enough to grant you a point, and the subject, Paul, and 48 seconds on fluffing, starting now.
I would take the gramophone needle and remove the fluff that had been collected on it from playing the records, of course.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Repetition of record.
Yeah, I said records that time.
I believe you did. You're quite right. Yes, sorry,
I see what you mean about that stupidity. It all evens out, doesn't it?
No, I did a quick rerun in my brain of the whole of the show.
Did you?
Yes.
Was there room for it?
40 seconds for you, Paul, on fluffing, starting now.
I have never fluffed a line in public. That's not quite true. I have fluffed several lines in public.
Richard Morton, you've got in.
I've worked with Paul for a long time, and you've fluffed more lines than you ever got right, I think, Paul, to be fair.
Yeah. Richard, whatever the challenge, I would have granted it to you, because it's nice to hear from you.
Good, because I was too scared to interrupt, really, for a minute there.
The subject is fluffing. There are 35 seconds left. Now, get ready for it, Richard.
Ready.
Yes. And you start now.
Fluffing is, of course, the activity that's removing tiny little bits of fluff from your navel. And although this isn't a particularly polite thing to use in conversation as such, it is the form of taking one's forefinger and thumb and removing, and I think you all know what I'm talking about, removing tiny little bits of unwanted thread or little bits of unwanted fluff, and that's...
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of unwanted.
Yes, and everything else, actually. I have to mention that because I sometimes get letters and say... I get letters saying, why didn't you hold him up for that and put him right? I don't know what I should have done, but anyway, because they obviously don't understand the game. It must take me 26 years, and I think this will all be cut because it's an absolute drivel.
It never has been cut in the past.
Peter, you pressed your buzzer and you walked across the room. What was the problem?
Well, I've pressed it several times and you don't seem to register it.
I don't do with me registering it. I have a panel in front of me, and the first person to press their buzzer, even if they're a fraction of a second ahead of the others, the light comes up according
perhaps
to that.
I'm a fraction of a second behind.
Exactly, yes.
Could be, yes.
Yes. So, Paul, you got in with the correct challenge, and 17 seconds are left on fluffing starting now.
The disc jockey Alan Freeman, who recently retired, was nicknamed Fluff. When he appeared on radio, if you can do such...
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Deviation, you can't appear on radio.
I was about to say if you can do such a thing.
But you didn't.
I would have done if you hadn't have buzzed. But I'm appearing on radio
Actually,
tonight.
I think colloquially speaking, one does talk about a radio appearance.
And you can, of course, disappear on radio.
Paul, you have the benefit of the doubt. You have 9 seconds, fluffing starting now.
One of the things I like to do on a weekend is to get the old laundry basket out. I wonder why I said it like that.
Richard, you
I think that was hesitation on
Yes, it was, yes. Definitely.
Because I don't know anyone
He
with
thought
an
it was old laundry basket. Didn't he? Richard, you very cleverly, because you haven't played the game before, got in with only 2 seconds to go.
Okay.
So don't put an in before you start, because otherwise, eventually they will pick you up in it. And the subject
Don't be
is
so
fluffing.
patronising. Come on.
It may
Nicholas,
sound
I'm over 30
patronising, but
now,
actually
it's okay.
it's genuinely from the heart to help someone who hasn't played it before. And Richard, you appreciate that, don't you?
You're lovely, Nicholas, thank you.
Yes, there we are. When you smile at that, Richard, don't worry me. Now listen, there's 2 seconds to go, starting now.
Interestingly
There we
enough...
are.
He didn't say and it was hesitation.
No. And you still have 2 seconds on fluffing, starting now.
Interestingly enough, that Paul should mention...
Well, Richard Morton was then speaking when the whistle went, so he gained the extra point that time. Peter Jones, who thinks his buzzer isn't working, hasn't scored yet, but... Richard, we'd like to hear from you. Would you take the next round?
Yeah.
And I think it's been chosen especially for you. It is Newcastle. Will you tell us something about that delightful part of our country, starting now?
Yes, I'd be most happy to talk about the subject of Newcastle, as that is my hometown and therefore a place close to Richard Morton's heart, where we love...
Derek Nimmo challenged.
Hesitation,
51 seconds. Please tell us something about Newcastle, starting now.
My favourite Newcastle is Chateauneuf-du-Pape.
Deviation, because we pronounce it Newcastle.
Yes, but actually, Richard, I think he was about to talk about a different Newcastle.
Oh, quite right then. Forgive
I'm
me,
afraid
Derek.
it was an incorrect challenge. 48 seconds for you, Derek, to continue on Newcastle, starting now.
Which was founded by Pope Clement in the 14th century when they actually moved to Avignon. But, of course, talking about
Peter Jones a challenge.
A deviation. He's talking about a chateau, not a castle, let alone Newcastle. Well, you don't say ninth castle of the Pope, do you? If you want to ring some
What an
rather
interesting
rough...
discussion. Peter, you got the subject.
Oh,
and
good.
you have 41 seconds to tell us something about Newcastle, starting now.
Last time I was in Newcastle, an elderly man recognised me in the street, and he couldn't understand why I was there. I explained that I was at the theatre, but he'd never heard of it. All the years of his life, he'd lived there and never attended this wonderful playhouse that's in Newcastle.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Hesitation.
There was a hesitation, there was an Derek, you've got back in with 24 seconds to go. Paul has challenged.
I didn't.
Well, you pressed your buzzer,
Did
Paul.
I? Sorry.
There you are, you see. There's somebody who's been tampering with these...
Derek, yes, you're in on the 24 seconds, Newcastle, starting now.
My favourite church in Newcastle is St Nicholas.
Paul challenge.
It's a repetition of favourite.
Yes, because you talked about your favourite before. That's right. Well, listen, Paul. 22 seconds on Newcastle, Paul, starting now.
During the making of Robin Hood in 1922, Douglas Fairbanks was shown the new castle that would be the prop for the film. At first, he was astonished by the sheer size of it.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
It was 1923.
Paul, the audience have given you the benefit of the doubt, and they have 9 seconds for you to continue on Newcastle, starting now.
He was worried that his acrobatics would be dwarfed by this huge structure. He said, "This is a massive erection in front of me." And they...
Well, once again, Paul Merton was speaking as the whistle went, gained an extra point. And, Peter, your turn to begin. The subject, the council. Will you tell us something about that subject in this game, starting now?
What a rotten subject. The council. I mean, what kind of council are you talking about? Or am I supposed to be talking about?
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Well, repetition of talking for a start.
Yes, for a start. Hesitation, yes. 53 seconds for Derek Nimmo on the council, starting now.
Well, I suppose the council, as far as I am concerned, is the council of the Royal Borough of Kensington-Chelsea, where I am happy enough to live, where the refuse collection is splendid, and the streets are well cleaned, there are flowers on the lamppost, and we have an awfully nice lady mayor who's called Miss Elizabeth Christmas, which is awfully festive at certain times of the year. It's the second time, actually, on these wonderful seats on council.
Peter Jones has challenged.
Well, a repetition of time. Not that I want to talk about it.
But you've got the subject and a point, of course, for a correct challenge, and you've got 30 seconds to try and talk on the council, starting now.
Well, it's very interesting to hear that in Kensington they've got such a good refuse collection. I wonder if they collect bottles as well, and newspapers, and generally behave in an ecologically correct manner.
Challenge.
This is deviation now. We're talking about collecting waste.
That's right, Paul. This is deviation. We got away from the council. No, you never mentioned the word council. You
if that's the subject. I don't have to mention the name of the subject every time I speak.
You started
You're supposed to know the subject, Nicholas, you say.
Peter, I've got to be fair.
They all know what I'm
They know
talking
what
about.
the subject. What's the subject?
But Peter, I have to be fair within the rules of just a minute, and you started off talking about refuse collection.
Well, I think you are being very unfair. I think you've been got at by somebody's agent.
Oh, well, it hasn't been worthwhile if it's true. It's terrible. Paul Merton, correct challenge, 19 seconds, the council, starting now.
Julian Clary used to have this line in his acts, "Who cuts your hair? Is it the council?" It wasn't a particularly original observation of his. I think he got it out of a book called 2001 Quips for the Price of a Fiver. I worked for the council myself in the early 1980s, and it was my job to go round...
Right, Paul Merton has increased his lead at the end of that round, and it's his turn to begin. And what a subject, getting round Nicholas. He doesn't usually get round me, he just comes straight out and punches me between the teeth with his remark. Getting round Nicholas, Paul, starting now.
I find that a quick £50 note in the back pocket before I record in just a minute means that the majority of decisions come my way. If Peter Jones knew this, he would, I'm sure, indulge in this financial activity. Nicholas is probably one of the most corrupt broadcasters this country has seen since the days of Lord Haw-Haw. I know it's repetition, but I don't care.
I resent that round of applause of being compared to Lord Haw-Haw. I've never seen such a big smile on your face for a long time. But Derek, you challenge first.
Repetition of Haw-Haw.
And 38 seconds. Getting round Nicholas, starting now.
Well, of course, 26 years ago, it was much easier to get around Nicholas with a tape measure because his waist was very much narrower and his chest less flabby. He, that time, hadn't developed the huge pot belly which he now thrusts on top of the table when adjudicating at just a minute.
Richard, you've challenged. Deviation?
Yes, quite right, Nicholas.
Well, quite right. I haven't got a pot belly, have I?
No, indeed. No, I was just thinking getting around Nicholas must be what I have to do now to get back in the game.
No. The image they've got of Lord Haw-Haw with a pot belly.
It's not far from the truth. I'd pick you out of the crowd.
So you've got him with a correct challenge. 21 seconds on getting round Nicholas, starting now.
Before I did this show, I had no idea I'd have to be such a creepy little crawler in order to get back on the programme and give Nicholas my dashing smile in order to make him like me.
Derek challenge.
Well, he just sort of stopped, didn't he?
Because it was a shameful thing to say, and I was ashamed.
You'd said enough.
Derek, you've got in with 11 seconds to go on getting round Nicholas, starting now.
I find the best way to get around Nicholas is to be frightfully nice to his current mistress. She's rather nice, elderly woman who lives down in Wiltshire. and I take her knitting and bananas and the occasional orange, and she's awfully good to the old fellow. She really is. And that's why I think getting round Nicholas's...
Yeah, I resent being called Nicholas's mistress, thank you. You give a guy one smile.
Absolutely. 3 seconds to go. Getting round Nicholas, starting now.
I once met Nicholas...
Peter Jones's challenge.
Hesitation.
I
didn't start soon enough.
I'm only tempted to give it to you. I want to know what you're going to say about Nicholas. That was all.
Well, I know. I've only got 2 seconds.
Let Richard finish and then hear what you've got to say. So, Richard, we've got 2 seconds to go. Another point to you. Getting round Nicholas, starting now.
What a charming and generous man Nicholas Parton...
Richard was then speaking as Whistle went, got an extra point. And Peter, what were you going to say if you'd had the correct challenge?
If you'd like, I can give a quite long and detailed description of your life in Malaysia, for instance, where you had that unfortunate experience, which I managed to help you out of. But I don't want to boast about saving your life in anything. It's something I've actually regretted ever since.
Richard Morton, it's your turn to begin. The subject, weight. Will you tell us something about that? You can talk about your slim figure or mine, whichever you prefer. And we've got 60 seconds starting now.
Weight. Well, as anyone can see, I don't weigh very much. I think slim would be a very polite euphemism for it. Skinny would be the real word I would use for it. Whereas, in fact, heavy would be a word perhaps people might find.
Derek challenged.
Well, just a word.
48 seconds,
Looks
Derek,
easy,
for you
looks
to tell us
easy.
something about weight, starting now.
At Christmas time, the waits come round singing carols like good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen. And God rest ye, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. And when the ground is covered with water and the rain is pouring down and the weights appear, you're suddenly filled.
Paul Merton has challenged.
Repetition of weights.
Yes.
Well, what's the subject?
Subject's weight.
Tell me it's weight, and you said weights.
Oh.
Yes. So, Paul, you've got in very cleverly with 30 seconds to go and tell us something about weight starting now.
I like to be fairly punctual when I go to meet people. I don't like to wait that...
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Division of like.
So Derek's got back with a sharp challenge, 24 seconds. Weight starting now.
There are 16 ounces in 1 pound and 2,200...
Peter Jones, you challenged.
Well, there aren't 2. There are more than that.
Yes. 20 seconds for you, Peter, to tell us something about weight starting now.
People seem to be obsessed with weight, and practically everybody you meet is on a diet. And considering there's so many people in the world starving to death, it does seem rather ironic. It's a pity that the world can't be organised in such a way that the people who are trying to lose
Richard,
weight...
you challenge.
Repetition of the word people.
6 seconds for you, Richard, on weight starting now.
I was taking a breath. That was a breath.
Breathing, I think.
He was breathing.
Hesitation.
A beginner's allowed to breathe a bit more than others.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Does that include scuba diving?
No, I'm going to be... I can't let you get away with it again.
All right,
it
that's
was
the last
too long
time
a
I'll
pause
take a
before
breath,
you started.
thanks.
5 seconds starting now.
Everything comes to he who waits. That's a famous saying. And only tonight I was standing outside the...
Paul's Merton challenge.
What? Just anything.
Just anything, really. I didn't like the way he said that.
That's not fair.
I think he's breathing
from his
too
normal
much
delivery
for a
or something.
newcomer. I didn't like he was exhaling at a rapid rate.
I know, yes. You've got 2 seconds to go on weight starting now.
Throwing one's weight around is a phrase that comes...
Derek, it's your turn to begin. The subject is making dough. Will you tell us something about that subject starting now?
Well, if you put some flour and water together and knead it, and don't cook it indeed, then that becomes dough. I suppose colloquially the expression is used to make a lot of money. It's an Americanism, one of those foul words that come out of New York and places like that. I don't like the idea of making dough. It's when those letters arrive for you and say, this letter has gone 3 times round the world.
Richard challenge.
Repetition of the word letter.
Yes, 36 seconds are left for making dough starting now.
When you think of
Paul Merton challenge.
Deviation, he breathed a lot quicker that time. He's not breathing like a newcomer.
All right, show how generous I can be. Give Paul a bonus point, but Richard keeps the subject. 35 seconds left. Making dough, Richard, starting now.
Making dough makes you instantly think of making. I can't do it now. He's making me breathe funny.
Yes. Peter, your light came on first.
Did it?
Yes. What's your challenge? Making. Yes, you're quite right. You're well spotted, Peter. You have 31 seconds to tell us something about making dough starting now.
It's a very interesting substance, dough, because you can make it into fettuccine, spaghetti, or pasta of practically any kind, and donuts. And if you add the right things to it, additives like fruit and nuts, you can make it into quite a nice...
Derek Nimmo challenge.
You can make.
You were making too much there, Peter.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes.
So Derek's got him with 13 seconds on making dough starting now.
They say that this...
And Peter Jones' challenge.
Slow off the mark, I thought.
Yes. Hesitation, yes.
What?
12 seconds for you, Peter, on making dough starting now.
Then you have to let it rise in a warm atmosphere. An airing cupboard is often quite a good place to put this stuff. And then, when it's risen, and about twice the size... What's the matter?
Paul challenged just before the whistle went. Paul, what was it?
I was going to say hesitation.
No, I don't think so. No, I think so. Another point to Peter. You've got half a second on making dough, Peter, starting now.
And then it's ready.
Well, a very fair contest this week. Peter Jones is speaking of the whistle win. Got a lot of points in that round. He's still in fourth place, but he's only 3 points behind equal leaders, Derek, Paul and Richard. Peter, your turn to begin. The subject, complaints. Will you tell us something about that in this game, starting now?
I guess the complaints department in big stores is probably their busiest section, because there are so many things that go wrong and people have so many complaints to make, though I must admit the British are rather reticent.
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of many.
Paul, you've got in with 45 seconds on complaints, starting now.
The audience here complain every week when Just a Minute is recorded in front of them. Why is Nicholas Parsons hosting this show? He can barely string a sentence together. It's difficult for the others. They're talking off the top of their head, but all he has to do is...
Richard, you challenged again. I quite agree, Richard.
Very cool. No, I think that's one you ought to put to the audience.
All right, I will if you like. If you agree with Paul, you all shout for Paul now, right? If you disagree with Paul and agree with me, you all shout for me.
You've got relatives in, I say.
Thank you, fan club. Right, Richard, you have 27 seconds on complaints. Starting now.
Breathing complaints is an affliction I didn't think I suffered from until very recently. This can come in many forms, of course, some sort of respiratory or lung disorder, something to do with the throat or perhaps even the mouth. Taking air in one's nostrils and then speaking is a perfectly normal way of acting in a quiz show, except Paul Merton seems to find this quite extraordinary. Every time I open my mouth, he finds it to...
Paul Merton has challenged.
Repetition of mouth.
Yes, you've opened your mouth a bit too much. I'm sorry, Richard.
Bit mouthy.
Paul, you have a correct
properly
challenge.
all the way through.
And you've got him with 5 seconds to go on complaints, starting now.
When I went to school, I used to complain about the amount of homework that I had.
Derek Nimmo challenge.
Repetition of complaint.
You did complain when you were talking previously.
Did I?
Yes. So you've got him with half a second on complaints. Derek, starting now.
I've got very nasty complaints. I've got a rash underneath my armpits.
Right. Well, you took that round at such a speed, we've got time for another one. So it could be anybody's contest, even yours, Peter. And,
It's not going to be Clement Freud's, is it? There can't be anybody's.
Only 3 points to make up, Peter, and you could win. So, Paul, would you take this round? The subject is sharks. There are 60 seconds as usual, starting now.
I suppose the most famous shark, certainly in Hollywood films, is the shark that appeared in the movie Jaws. Made in 1975 by Steven Spielberg, it was considered perhaps one of his greatest works of cinematic art. In this particular film...
Peter Jones, you've challenged.
Phil, He repeated film.
Yeah, he did repeat film. He packed in, but he did very well.
Just to watch your face, though.
40 seconds.
It was 77.
40 seconds are left for you, Peter, starting now.
I was reading the other day that sharks are actually a threatened species, or some of them are. And it does seem to me a pity that people are eating them so much all over the world, particularly in Japan. Now, a shark, if we treat him right...
Derek Nimmo challenge.
I don't think it's a pity at all. Deep into it, much rather people were eating them than they were eating us.
Well, that's a matter of opinion, isn't it?
It is a matter of opinion.
Do the Japanese eat us? Have I missed the news?
Peter, 28 seconds on sharks, starting now.
They could be trained to make very good pets for people who like the sea. And they would take some time.
Paul Merton challenge.
Repetition of people.
20 seconds. Paul...
I never listen to myself.
20 seconds are left, starting now.
Apparently, the shark is an extremely well-designed animal and, in fact, could not be improved in any way, apart from the one fact that if it stops swimming, it dies. So it has to go continually forward. Now, this may be a little bit of a disadvantage. You might fancy a rest.
Repetition of the word be?
B?
Now, this may be a little bit of a disadvantage.
Richard,
yes, it was. I heard him breathing. He went b.
You got too keen now, I think, Richard.
Oh, dear, all right then.
But it was a correct challenge, and there's only half a second to go, and it's the last round. So, it's yours. Sharks, Richard, starting now.
Every breath you...
And someone challenge you.
Hesitation.
No, another point to Richard. Off you go again, a quarter of a second.
Every breath you take.
Oh dear, I've been too generous to Richard. Well, that's a very interesting show because Derek Nimmo and Paul Merton were fighting it out, neck and neck, in the lead for a long time, and then with a little help from the chairman, Richard Morton, who's never played the game, came from nowhere and has finished up 1 point ahead of all of the others, and he's therefore the winner this week. So all the money that the other three gave me before the show has been utterly useless, as you see. Anyway, we've enjoyed playing Just a Minute. It only remains me to thank our bright and irrepressible panellists, Derek Nimmo, Peter Jones, Paul Merton and Richard Morton, and thank also Jane for keeping the score and blowing her whistle, the creator of the game, that's Ian Messiter, and of course our producer who tries to keep us in order, that is Sarah Smith. And from me, Nicholas Parsons, thank you for tuning in. Hope you're with us next time we play Just a Minute. Till then, from all of us, goodbye.